The day we just avoided a fascist takeover. Well, I think obviously, as I'm gesturing towards, I think a lot of the rhetoric around January 6th coming from the left gets really overheated and it is cringe and it's hard not to just take them all as ridiculous fools who are just using this to bash political enemies and who are just shrill to begin with. And we shouldn't take anything they say seriously. But I think I'm going to offer some realism on this matter. I don't really have a dog in this fight, and I think that it's important to see it clearly. And I think there are also some insights that we can gain from looking at it about the nature of the American right, that is conservatism, and how it in fact cannot take power. And anyway, don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but here, let's start out. Yes, was January 6th utterly buffoonish and embarrassing? Of course it was. Was there any real chance for them to install Donald Trump as a dictator? No. And I don't actually think that's what they were trying to do. So they didn't even want to do that exactly. Were we just in imminent danger of a fascist state or a terror state or something like that? No, we weren't. So, I'm being realistic here. I'm not trying to be shrill. That being said, is the proper name for January 6th an insurrection? I would say yes. And were they, through some kind of use of force, some kind of non-legislative means, attempting to take power in some form? Yes, they were. So it wasn't just a riot. It wasn't just, boomer conservatives trespassing on the Capitol. It wasn't something that got out of hand. It was a peaceful protest and then it went wild. And no, it also wasn't a bunch of left wing or FBI agitators, agents provocateur, attempting to make the right look bad in some kind of elaborate scheme. It wasn't that. It was an actual insurrection. And there was a plan behind it. And it utilized what I'm going to focus on in this talk. That is the three power centers of the conservative movement. The so-called conservative legal movement. You can think the Federalist Society, you can think the appointing of all these judges, Donald Trump's list of Supreme Court nominees, which he put out before being elected, etc. It is part of the conservative legal movement. It is part of the widening alt media, and I'm not exactly referring to the alt-right. The alt-right is, or the dissident right, or whatever, kind of a subset of this. But it was based on that, and it was based on something that is pretty uniquely right-wing. I mean, there's some analogs on the left, but I think the right wing does it with the most passion and gusto. And that is this populist activism, and one that was particularly toxic in 2020 and 2021 in the sense that it was laced with QAnon online delusion and was thus, visionary, lunatic, conspiratorial, etc. They were attempting to engage in a kind of legal, not a full coup in the sense of installing Donald Trump as a sovereign dictator or something like that, or a king. They weren't trying to do that, but they certainly were trying to maintain his presidency for another 4 years. And they didn't quite have other plans. Like, what would that look like with a split Senate, or what would that look like with a Democrat to Congress? They weren't trying to do that. It was focused solely on the presidency. This is one thing that liberals have pointed out, and it is a knockout punch in terms of the Stop the Steal movement, which is that, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if the election was stolen, then why were you elected? Surely if this whole thing is a fraud, we wouldn't let a patriot like yourself get elected to Congress. That is a very good question. It is a pretty much a knockout blow when it comes to the whole Stop the Steal movement. So let me focus on these in greater length. I'm going to focus less on the conservative legal movement because I find its role in this to be pretty kind of merely instrumental, you could say. But it was certainly serious. Donald Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. So the Supreme Court is a kind of litmus test for many conservative voters, or at least it's treated that way, in the sense of, yeah, the GOP are a bunch of cucks, but we got to get these Supreme Court justices up there, and maybe, just maybe, we might overturn Roe v. Wade. Also, a Republican, they're going to support, textualist or constitutionalist judges, etc. This was a huge motivation for Republicans. It's been a major motivation for decades now. And it also played a kind of instrumental hand in this saga in the case of the Eastman memo. So you have John Eastman. He spoke at the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th, rather briefly. He is a longtime member of the Federalist Society. He's a very powerful Republican lawyer. He crafted a legal scheme to maintain Trump in power. It was all based on the assumption of widespread voter fraud. And it was basically based on the assumption of canceling electors and then getting a new vote in Congress to appoint Donald Trump as president. You can read about this, just Google Eastman memo. He had it all planned, and it was contingent upon Mike Pence. Mike Pence was a keystone in all of this. And when Mike Pence decided not to go along, there was really no hope of it ever succeeding whatsoever. So you can look into that. The fact is, much like, the alt-right, they joked, we want mass immigration, but we want to do it legally. You could say the same thing really about January 6th, which is that we wanted a coup, but we were going to do it legally. So it was basically a kind of equivocation, shenanigans, legal shenanigans in order to get their way. They did not want Trump to be dictator. They wanted him to remain 4 years. So there actually was a mechanism in place for this to happen, and it was dependent upon Mike Pence. And you can see this in the, I think word had gotten around. You can see this in the over-the-top, seemingly violent, denunciation of Pence in the sense of, let's hang this bastard. So it was real. Now, would it have succeeded? Would they simply have, canceled electors and then Congress would have voted in Biden anyway? Yes. But I would say probably. But was there at least an attempt for this to work out? The answer to that is yes, and thus it was an insurrection. Again, I don't have a dog in this fight. I simply want to be realistic and look beyond the kind of polarization where you either have shrill inflation of January 6th on the part of liberals, or you have this kind of dismissive deflation of it on the part of conservatives where, it wasn't a big deal, or it didn't actually happen. It was a fake. It was agent provocateurs, etc. I think we should just get away from that nonsense and look at something straight. Being an adult is calling things by their name, taking responsibility. The other aspect of this, besides the legal movement, was the, you could say, alternative influencers as, support for this. I think this is kind of unique to the conservative ecosystem. Not that there aren't influencer types on the left. In fact, what is it, the Hassan guy on Twitch who just restreams, other people's content or mainstream content and comments on it and is a millionaire now due to this. I do not understand why people watch that, but there it is. Or is it someone like David Pakman or Sam Cedar, the kind of more intelligent type who does policy analysis and so on? There are these types of people on the liberal left, but they are dramatically outnumbered by the right-wing analogs to them. Tim Pool being a kind of icon of this grift. Basically, a show that is entirely focused on news, a show that features, mediocrities and sub-mediocrities of all kinds from the conservative ecosystem, just basically talking about news, misrepresenting things, to the point where you are absolutely dumber after listening to a 3-hour live stream than you were before you started. There's a kind of negation of insight, negative contribution to discourse pursued by these folks. But you could also say that the conservative media is kind of all about that someone like Tim Pool, although he's using a new medium, isn't really fundamentally new. I think so much of the conservative ecosystem is reactionary. So the liberals control the New York Times. That is, they report the news. The conservatives control National Review or Human Events. That is, they critique the New York Times. And you see this kind of hegemony versus reaction asymmetry or dynamic, where the liberals set the narrative, they determine what is fit to print, they determine what is newsworthy and what's not, and then the conservatives whine about that in think pieces. This is a very strong asymmetry. If you just name off the top of your head, what are the big liberal news organizations? You will name, I don't know, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. You name these major institutions that present themselves as hard news and serve that function. If you want to name what are the most famous conservative outlets, it's National Review, the Daily Caller, Breitbart, etc. There's some more. Those are reactionary. They're not actually reporting the news. They might maybe repost an AP column or do some news scraping, that is, take the facts and kind of reproduce it in their own style. But they're not actually determining what's fit for print. What they are doing is reacting to a hegemonic entity. Below that, in terms of just like professionalism and institutionalism, there is this massive grift sphere of conservatism, for which Tim Pool is an excellent icon or avatar. So the conservatives needed these influencers, or at least thought they needed them, in order to get this whole thing pushed through. So Tim Pool, even though he'll always kind of equivocate and, play both sides or say he was just asking questions, he was clearly promoting a stop the steal narrative to his millions of followers. And it was kind of like, well, after this Texas lawsuit, I don't know how Biden's going to recover from this. All this euphemistic, euphoric headlines about how, this isn't over and Trump's going to win, guys. There were people who were much harder core than that. And so you, at the very beginning of Stop the Steal, you saw a few people. You saw grifter extraordinaire Ali Akbar, or Ali Alexander, raising tons of money, promoting this stuff. You had Alex Jones, you had Nick Fuentes there right at the beginning. Each of those is able to command a major fan base. Let's say Jones and Fuentes. So Fuentes is wildly popular with a kind of Zoomer, maybe young millennial contingent who watch live streams and just kind of love his stuff. There's a lot of humor involved, a ton of irony, a ton of bashing of people, but also pretty mainstream politics, when the rubber hits the road, but a kind of, white nationalist vibe or shadow or something around there as well. So you have someone like Fuentes doing that. You could say similar, though different things about Alex Jones. He does some things that are somewhat mainstream. And in some ways, he's just this wild personality who rips his shirt off and screams, whatever. But throughout his career, he's always gone there, much like Fuentes will go there in terms of the alt-right or white nationalism. Alex Jones will go there in terms of wild conspiracies about aliens, crisis actors, the Illuminati, the Rothschild family, etc. So he, it's a feature, not a bug, as I will often say about these things. It's not like, oh, I wish Alex Jones would just stick to the facts and not, talk about the aliens or whatever. No, the fact that he ultimately goes there is the secret to his success. He wouldn't be where he is without that. I would say the same thing about Nick Fuentes. The fact that he, on some level, presents himself as a kind of white nationalist incognito is actually really important in terms of his fan base and in terms of maintaining that kind of edge that makes what he's doing popular and powerful. So you had the alternative influencers totally on board with this thing. And so they were able to do an end run around the mainstream media. So conservative supporters, a majority of whom think that the election was stolen, could go learn about the news from Tim Pool or Nick Fuentes or Alex Jones or their ilk. And they didn't have to go through the mainstream mechanism of, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post or MSNBC or their local news channel, which is not going to be telling them that the election is stolen. It might at most report on the right-wing influencers, but it will not report on them as truth tellers. So we have all of these millions of conservatives have exited the conservative movement. They are listening to, say, Tim Pool first. They're getting Tim Pool's take, but it's not like they've read the news story first. They're getting it from Tim Pool, or Jimmy Dore, or all these types of people. They're going there first. They're getting the take before the actual thing, and so an end run is being made around the mainstream media. That is a remarkable phenomenon. It's a Trump era thing. Very remarkable, very powerful, and can lead to all sorts of crazy nonsense, as we've seen. So the influencers are on board. Thus, the mainstream media was impotent to stop the rumors of the election being stolen. The more they hit back at this meme, the greater it grew. There was no way that they could stop it at some point, because the more you contradict a conspiracy theory, I mean, the New York Times debunking a conspiracy theory is, from these people's perspective, fact. It's like, oh, well, of course the New York Times debunked this. I mean, that just means it's true. So it was a vicious cycle, and they were extremely important in this matter. Alex Jones claimed that one of his supporters, donors, rented the ellipsis. He was there. He was walking up to the steps. He also, at some point, said no violence. I mean, it's very ambiguous. But he was absolutely there. Nick Fuentes was a little bit further away. He is on camera with a megaphone, saying, "Oh, we've entered the Capitol now. This is awesome. We're not going anywhere until Trump's here for 4 years, and they throw out every illegal immigrant, etc." They were clearly directly involved in this massive mechanism that was underway. The other aspect of this, and I guess it's kind of connected to things that I've already, to the influencers, is that right-wing populism. The Tea Party people, the people attracted to QAnon, the mobilization of that base, largely white, to get boots on the ground and go out there. This is also something that is underestimated because it kind of doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it is quite powerful. So one of the interesting things that I noticed, I first started hearing about QAnon in late 2017. I looked into it rather briefly and just immediately thought the whole thing was total nonsense. By about 2018, this thing that had started on 4chan had gone over to 8chan and 8kun and all this stuff that was, if we're to believe this recent documentary that was put out, was actually, at least at the end, kind of the product of Ron Watkins. This thing, which was on like the most outrageous, scatological part of the internet imaginable, a 4chan and 8chan, etc., these places where you can find like horrifying nonsense, snuff films, porn of all varieties, including the most toxic thing you can imagine. Also, the kind of crazy white supremacy, neo-Nazism. It's just a kind of like id brain of the internet. That was being, Q originated there. Q was being sanitized and presented to boomers and Gen Xers through other spokespeople. So, Alex Jones was huge in this, Jerome Corsi. They would take the Q drops. The people who were reading Q wouldn't have to go to 8chan. They would take the Q drops and they would interpret them, offer a kind of biblical exegesis, and onward. And this was a huge dynamic at play. So it wasn't just the Tea Party, which was about, the trauma of the 2008 financial crash. It was about Barack Obama. It was about, all sorts of things. But it was kind of, at the end of the day, about taxes. If you had to ask them, what are you really doing here? It was about taxes. But with QAnon, it was about so much more. It was about identifying yourself as a patriot. It was about satanic child predators who are, in Washington right now. It was about the fight of good versus evil. It was just it was the Tea Party times 1,000, the Tea Party on steroids, the Tea Party on meth, you could say. And that was a remarkable thing. And it was able to inspire far greater intensity and action than ever before. And so all of these things, these like key aspects of the American right, were really firing on all cylinders. They were working together in a way. I remember a lot of us will look back at, say, 2016 and 2017 of the alt-right and say, oh, it was amazing because, so many of these entities in the alt-right writ large were always kind of like not talking to one another or fighting with each other. But then they all seemed to kind of get along there for a moment, for a year and a half or so. And they were all, emphasizing one another or reiterating one another. And so it became something that was a powerful movement. Well, when the conservatives got involved in this, they amped that up to 11. They did what the alt-right did in its way times a million. And it was much more powerful, had much more money involved in it, and was able to reach normal people. So normal people were becoming excited by Q. A lot of, say, teenagers in 2015 were, red pilled on 4chan or something because they were seeing ideas or memes or whatever that they had never seen before. They're getting red pilled. Well, a slightly different dynamic was taking place when the normies got red pilled. It was through these spokesmen, through these alternative influencers who were basically giving them that. And now, look, Alex Jones might have denounced Q, but, that's kind of meaningless. His whole audience is Q. Tim Pool, I doubt ever, literally addressed a Q drop or something. I doubt he ever did that or didn't mention Q affirmatively. I might be wrong about that. But he was a kind of shade of QAnon. So he might not have done that, but he was saying effectively the same thing. The Democrats are terrible and evil, and Trump is going to win in a 50-state landslide, and this is going to be amazing. And, also the election was stolen, blah, blah. So even if these people deny Q or deny their involvement with Q or whatever, it's kind of a distinction without a difference. The major factor was that they were on board with this, and that there was this great dovetailing or coming together, which led to something very powerful. So I guess that I have spoken for about 30 minutes. I think I have said my piece on this. I think the question of kind of like, is the January 6th thing going to happen again? I'm a little bit torn by this. On some level, I would say yes, and then I'm also a little bit wary of just sounding a kind of shrill alarm and saying, "Oh yeah, they're going to be 100 more of this. We've entered a new world." If you look at January 6th, you see a pattern that you did see with Charlottesville and the alt-right. So after Charlottesville, there was a lot of mutual denunciation, and then there was the we're not going to do that again. We're not going to get trapped again. And thus, there was an attempt to do a rally in September on behalf of the people who were, in their minds, unjustly, held in captivity because of their involvement in January 6th. And no one came out to that. It was a kind of non-entity. It reminded me a lot of Jason Kessler's 2018 Unite the Right rally. And this is largely forgotten, but there was very little involvement in that, and just a lot of people kind of poo-pooing it or claiming that it was a honeypot, etc. So you see a lot about that. That tends to make me believe that this isn't going to happen again. On the other hand, the dovetailing that occurred over 2020 is still in effect. And so, Tucker Carlson claims that Q didn't exactly exist. He said on air one time, "Well, what is Q? We tried to find a website. There is none. What is this thing?" Well, what is it, Tucker? It is probably the most important social phenomenon of the last 10 years. I don't know. And the fact that there's not a website almost demonstrates its power. You can't quite pin it down. It's like a torrent on the internet. Once it's been released, there's no source for it, and it becomes that more powerful. It's a mimetic operation of spreading its genes everywhere. And so, but at the end of the day, Tucker Carlson, although he was quite reasonable at the beginning of the pandemic, has basically presented himself as a vaccine denier, whether, even though he's clearly been vaccinated, as a COVID denier, as someone who, again, I might even agree with I would agree with many criticisms of the COVID masking regime and so on, but he has emphasized those and made that kind of his thing. And so a lot of this dovetailing between, say, mainstream forces and influencers, Donald Trump himself, is still in effect. Now, will this change after Donald Trump suggested that everyone get vaccinated, which he did a week ago or so? I don't know. Are they actually going to denounce him like they seem to be doing when they first reacted to his comments about vaccinations? I don't know. Might this whole thing crack up? Maybe. But there does seem to be a lot of residual force there, a lot of momentum that is connecting these aspects of the right to the point that they really have a lot in common. They don't want to denounce each other, and they see themselves as kind of tied in with the same movement. So, will another January 6th happen? I would probably say no, but is the kind of craziness and unity within the American right still there? I would say yes. And so something else might happen. It won't be January 6th, but it will be something that we haven't predicted yet. But it will, again, be based on that dynamic. All right. Those are my thoughts. And I'll let some people in here. And I guess this is Guillaume. You're here first, so you can jump in first if you'd like.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having the space. So I didn't have a question ready, but I do have a question now. So you said there's three parts of the conservative movement, and it's their legal branch, and then the alt media, and then what was the third one?
The populist movement. So basically, in some ways, as after I've talked about it, it's directly connected with the alt influencers. It's this massive body of conservatives, a lot of Gen Xers and boomers who are really willing to go out there. I mean, one fascinating thing we learned about January 6th and Charlottesville, there was not a lot of crossover. There's some notable, Baked Alaska, Nick Fuentes, but there actually wasn't a lot of crossover. It was a different type of person. There were some interesting things that there was a University of Chicago study of a lot of people who are red partisans living in a blue state. So it wasn't exactly most people coming from Alabama. It's more likely someone coming from, say, Pennsylvania, or being in a blue county but being a diehard partisan. So you kind of feel stressed. There was also, there were some significant things, middle-aged. I was about the average age of a January 6th insurrectionist. There's also some divorce in there. So there might have been some other factors that might have kind of created a certain trauma. But the main thing was that you have this body of people who are willing to put boots on the ground and who are connected to that alt media system. And that alt media system is their news source. So it's not just that, like, I happen to watch a Tim Pool video after I read my local paper or the Washington Post in the morning, which was true maybe like 20 years ago. It's now like I just get on Tim Pool, like, what is Tim Pool saying? What is Alex Jones saying? That's my news source. And that is like a fundamental psychological change. So yeah, it's those factors. Now, obviously, I've left out Trump himself, but I kind of wanted to talk about these three things about the conservative movement, which are pretty unique, and I don't think exactly exist on the left. Not that there aren't left-wing judges, but there's not a real like liberal conservative, liberal legal movement in the same way that there's on the right. There are some left-wing or liberal alt media types, but it's not as big as the right-wing ecosystem. And in terms of activism, there's BLM, there are other things that aren't quite the same as like a 45-year-old divorced guy from Pennsylvania who is putting his boots on the ground, going out there and saying that, we're going to stop this steal. We're going to keep Trump in office. I don't think there's really the equivalent of that on the liberals. BLM is something different, and then the kind of violent rioting is something different than you see on the right. So I think those things are pretty unique. Now, there's some things that I've left out that are worth discussing, but aren't really my focus. Like, there were pipe bombs left on January 6th. Like, we don't know all of the answers to this. We don't fully know the degree to which there was communication between Trump and, say, some of these alt influencers and et cetera. Like, how much of a plan was it? They seem to all be on the same page, but the text messages that were revealed by this congressional committee have been kind of like people like Laura Ingraham saying, like, call it off, this is a shit show, it's making you look bad. But we haven't seen something deeper, like actual communication or collaboration involving, I don't know, like Paul Gosar and Ali Akbar and Donald Trump, if that such a thing exists. So there's stuff that I left out, but I wanted to focus on those three kind of institutions of the right.
Okay, yeah. I think that's a good synopsis. But yeah, that's interesting that most of these J6 rioters, that they were you said red partisans in blue states, and then you had like a tweet earlier where you identified BLM as like an influence on the rioters, and I totally agree with that. I think that I don't think rightoids would have even thought to riot if there hadn't been like a whole summer of like riots happening.
I think it created a kind of psychological trauma, that I think is underestimated. I mean, as Ed Dutton has argued, and I agree with this 100%, like what created the summer of chaos, in 2020, a lot of it was COVID. So we all went and got, were cramped and shut in to our apartments and houses for months, and then we just had to explode. And it had to explode in some fashion. And it exploded in the sense of defund the police and Black Lives Matter. Things that have, I would say, in early 2022 have largely been memory hold. Like, we somehow don't care about that anymore. And that probably has a lot to do with the fact that we're not locked down. I mean, you have to wear a mask when you go into Costco or whatever, but you're not locked down in the way that we were. And that clearly created an explosion. What else was I going to say? And then that trauma of seeing people on the streets, seeing people even take over small, like, municipalities or sub-municipalities, like the Raz Al SoundCloud, who took over downtown Seattle. Like, just seeing it on social media, not necessarily witnessing it or feeling its impact, because a lot of these people are like, you're from rural Pennsylvania or whatever, you're not anywhere close to be a BLM protest, but just seeing it on social media and kind of feeling it and living it, seeing it on Fox News, etc. I do think it was traumatic and created this kind of background for an explosion.
Conservatives were like really freaking out about the Chaz thing, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone out in Seattle. They were really freaking out about it. I remember, because I'm older than 2 years old, but I remember, like, it was kind of bizarre, but like that super resonated with them. And if you just say the word Seattle, like, a lot of conservatives will they'll react to it. It's very interesting.
Okay, let me keep moving on, because you've had your time. You can stay on as a speaker, but I'll just move on to get other people. So, Bartamu, you can speak or ask some questions. I'll just go down the line in the order, at least, that they're appearing on my screen.
Yes, I do think it was quite interesting. I do think that the 2020 election, late 2020, and the January 6th had a bit of it was a break with their usual conservative thing, with because they are usually quite obsessed with the legal technicalities, and that they should follow the constitution and so forth, and and law and order. And I do think that that it was. I do think Kyle Rittenhouse was the first break from this. That they started sympathizing with a vigilante, and I do also think that this culminated in January 6th. I think that they tried to overturn the election, and at the same time. And these are the people who claim to protect the Constitution as the same time as they organize a coup to overturn the Constitution.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's
But
completely bizarre.
in this weird way, like, again, I wrote some things last night that I was responding to this rather interesting, I think, outright communist named Caleb Malpin. Is that his name? I can't remember. But I follow him. I keep an eye on what he's doing. I don't agree, of course, but he was kind of saying that, like, oh, look, this wasn't a coup, and what they're expecting is that you have like a Juan Perón style coup, or something like that. Juan Perón, didn't he like retire from the military and was elected in a populist way? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Or a Mussolini style coup where you have the March on Rome and then the king of Italy kind of grants you power, puts it on a silver tray, in fact. But there was a kind of threat of violence, or at least some kind of wave of enthusiasm and so on. If you expect that, if you expect the military to be involved, like some kind of Latin American thing, and just this like outright seizure of power, you're going to be disappointed because they were never going to do that. They were never going to get like Frog March, the military Frog March, and declare there's a state of emergency and Donald Trump is sovereign dictator. That was never going to happen. And they would always do it in the name of the Constitution. And so you see this Caducean-like quality to the left and right, where it's like both how both the left and the right declare that the other side is racist. Both the left and the right declare that they are the true constitutionalist. And so, and you can say, it's like, oh, you liberal, you're not a constitutionalist. You never follow you're a big government supporter. And then, oh, you conservative, you're not a constitutionalist. You try to overthrow the government. But they both sincerely believe in what they're doing. They both do things in the name of America and in the name of kind of liberalism and the American way and the Constitution, et cetera. So it's actually kind of a fascinating dynamic. But we'll never see, well, never say never, but I seriously doubt we will ever see just like a full-on Latin American style military takeover where they're just basically like, fuck you, we're in charge. If you oppose us, we're going to shoot you. Like, that would be, refreshingly honest, you could say, but it's never going to happen. And what instead is going to happen are these weird, like, legal shenanigans where they declare themselves to be the ultimate constitutionalist. Like Donald Trump, like, no one is less racist than I am. No one loves the Constitution more than I do. I hug it every night before going to bed. Like, that's the dynamic that will play out. And so, like, expecting them to be something else is you'll always be disappointed. Or you can claim, like this guy or Glenn Greenwald or whatever, or Michael Tracy, where they're just doing this like endless, tedious, tweeting about how, oh, it wasn't a real coup or whatever. Well, okay, but like, it actually was what it was. They were actually attempting a conservative insurrection using their bases of power. And in declaring that it's not an insurrection, you are moving the goalpost, or like moving the frame of reference so that it's something more convenient to you. You're engaging in self-serving argumentation. And so I kind of can't, I don't know, I guess I can't stand both sides or all sides. Like, I can't stand these like liberal, like Glenn Greenwald or Michael Tracy or whatever, these like liberal apologists for conservatives, or just tedious like equivocators for whatever reason. They really hate the Democrats. They really hate the liberals. I get it. But like, you're not actually contributing to discourse. You're just moving the goalposts various times, and you're engaging in self-serving argumentation. So I can't stand it. I much prefer just the hard truth.
Yes, and they are very dishonest too, because in countries which have a military coup, relatively regularly, they have. I mean, they're honest that they say that, oh, we are transitional military junta or whatever.
Right.
These people, they say that the January 6th people, they say that no, we never tried to take power. It's the people who want to follow protocol. They are the real counter-revolutionaries, and they are the real people who hate America. And, I mean, it's so completely bizarre that these people can never admit to taking
And it's
power.
passive aggressive, which is also
Yeah,
just very strange. You know, it's like
yeah,
you done stole the election, so therefore we're going to take it back or something. And it's just like, look, you might actually accomplish. I mean, I hate to give them advice, but it's like you might actually accomplish something if you're just like, all right, folks, this is what we're up to. Like we're seizing power here, and like, get used to it. Like you might actually be able to achieve something that way, but like this weird passive aggressive thing where it's like, I mean, the best one was this woman who was interviewed. Now I could go find the clip; it's out there. But she was being interviewed by like a journalist, and they're like, "What happened?" She was like, "Oh my god, it's oppressive. They used tear gas on me." And they're like, and one police officer shoved me down or whatever. And they're like, oh, well, what were you doing? And they're like, well, it's a revolution. It's like, listen, sweetheart, if you, in any other century, maybe in any other decade, you attempt a revolution at the seat of power, they are gonna shoot you and bayonet your body. I mean, I'm just telling you, like, that is how governments operate. And there's this weird passive aggressive thing where they like want to take credit for January 6th as this like overflowing of popular enthusiasm and outrage at a stolen election, at the same time deny that it happened or claim that they were all peaceful and that the only bad ones were agents provocateurs sent by the FBI or something. It's just this like this level of denial and passive aggression, which I really cannot stand. I mean, again, Tucker Carlson, Darren Beatty, classic examples of this. And it's just like being actually honest and serious about what took place, you could conceivably learn something. Engaging in denial and passive aggression means that nothing, it's just this weird, ambiguous event that you want to kind of endorse and condemn at the same time.
yeah. It reminds me almost a bit when you use the word ambiguous. It reminds me a bit of Israel's nuclear arms policy, where you don't really everybody knows what's going on, but no one really
Right.
wants to say it, and they don't want to be held accountable for. And it's very weird that these people were able to. They want to have the cake and eat it too. They want to say that the election was stolen and that we want to overthrow the government. At the same time, they want to blame it all on Antifa when they start asking questions.
Well, it's part of the hegemony versus reaction asymmetry. They don't know how to act outside of it. They can only react to the hegemon.
Yeah.
So even when they're trying to seize power, apparently, like with a legal coup, like, oh, we want immigration as long as it's legal. Well, we want a coup as long as it's legal. So yeah. even when they're seizing power, they have to act like they're reacting to a hegemon. So it's pathetic. You're right.
And then we're the ultimate victims. Now, look, I actually think that there is. I'll just say this on the record. I actually do think there's some kind of heavy-handed treatment of many of these people. And at the end of the day, they were delusional. And if the government is going to go, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? It's a long-term investigation. But if the government is just going to go after the deluded foot soldiers and not actually prosecute like real organizers, then I actually agree with them. I think they're being treated it's a bit much to like, these deluded goofballs to just like keep them in jail or throw them in prison. I mean, look, some kind of punishment needs to be there, but just a little bit of charity here, folks. That being said, like again, where do they go? They immediately go to victimization, which is like the conservative id brain is I am a victim and I will prove my victimhood through passive aggression. And so it's like, let's talk about all these like people who are still in jail or whatever. And it's like, well, why don't we talk about what you fucking did first? You know?
Yeah, you said
I mean,
this.
I kind of agree with him. I think that it's a bit much to keep some guy in prison for like a year. Okay, but still.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that it is funny when you look at January 6th and BLM movement because you keep hearing all these conservatives who talk about the coming COVID tyranny and so forth. But the truth is that both left-wing rioters and right-wing rioters in 2020 and 2021, they got away with it. The people organized it. Both the BLM rioters, the people organized, they got away completely, and the January people like Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk, they are walking around completely free. I mean, which is a completely scandalous. So it's much closer to anarchy than Catalonian. America is the wet dream of some Catalonian anarchist. I almost get the impression of. It's absolute opposite from 1984.
Right. I mean, Charlie Kirk bust in countless people. It wouldn't have been as big if he had not done that. He is not. I mean, he's been hanged in the court of public opinion, but there's no going after them. If I were in charge, I would have gone after the organizers and the people who actually wanted to gain from this, and then been kind of soft on someone who was just a guy out there. You know, like, I think that just seems a little more moral, but they obviously are doing what they're going to do. And, but yeah, it would be, if the guy who rented out all this stuff, Donald Trump, who just clearly told them that he was going to be with them arm in arm. We're going to walk down Pennsylvania. We're going to scare the hell out of Congress. And we sure hope that Mike Pence does what he needs to do. You want to go down in history as a patriot, not a pussy, Mike. Like, he clearly was telling them to do that. Clearly, he's more to blame than like that, kind of crazy woman from Dallas who flew in and took her picture in front of a broken window or whatever.
I do think that Trump is. I do think that Trump, it is very bizarre that he has some. It was a very treasonous behavior he was engaging in, and I do think that. I mean, these are the sorts of thing that people get executed for in any other country than any other century, where someone just, or at least a long time in prison for, where they go out and say that, oh, I'm going to overturn this election and I'm going to lead a coup against it. I mean, it is completely. It's completely. I do think it's because of polarization that he got free. I don't think that if any presidential candidate acted like that before the year 2000, that they would have been able to go around free.
Or be popular, so on. All right, let's do this. Let's do Horatius, and then Magnus, and then Sushill, and I'll kind of go roughly in the order in which you came in, but I'm not perfect. So Horatius, you can go first.
All right. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
All right. Your point earlier about the fact of how you had a lot of red voters, so to speak, hardline red voters coming from blue states, that kind of reminds me of the old idea of the dynamic of, like, basically just old world government structures where you have the nobility going up against the commoners and the monarch of some sort, in the sense that these guys are living in blue states. I think Ashley Babbitt herself was from California.
Yeah.
If I recall. She was, and so they have their immediate rulers, and they're under this impression that they can appeal to Donald Trump as someone who can basically override their immediate rulers. They're kind of disillusioned on that. But one of the points about, that all aside, one of the points about January 6th was that it actually showed just how little sovereignty Congress actually has, and also the president. January 6th happens, and basically during that day and for the latter 2 weeks of his presidency, Donald Trump is basically shoved into the basement. He isn't given any briefings from the intelligence community. He's not able to do anything, and he loses his Twitter too. So he's just done. Yeah. And of course, during the day, Congress is basically evacuated. I don't know if they're evacuated from the building, but they're put into like a secure location, and they're like not in the halls of power and so on. And of course, the press is freaking out in lifetime. Well, as this was happening, two things were occurring. Number one, on January 6th, the stock market ended on a high. It went up during the day.
Interesting.
Furthermore, the VIX, the volatility index, went down throughout the day. You would think that the volatility index would at least like kind of jump up, but no, throughout the entire day it gradually went down.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. You would be thinking, not a cataclysmic jump, but there'd be some serious motions occurring.
Oh yeah.
But when in reality, the volatility index, which predicts like 30 days out, how's it going to be? It was going down. You can see it. It does it like quarterly throughout the day, and it was going down throughout the entire day. It was a fascinating thing to see. And so what I think is the most tragic aspect about this is that these people still think that sovereignty heavily relies on those elected in power, in the sense that they think that power flows from those elected, and in reality it flows through them. And I think that the stock market ending on a high that day and the volatility index going down as these people are just like waltzing around the Capitol shows just again how little sovereignty is actually in sort of the face of government.
Yeah, it's very. You're making a very important point, and in some ways, like this was the conservative movement blowing their wad, and that's all it is. It's like this is it. This is the utmost that you can threaten the system with, and it was ultimately handled in a few hours. I mean, it looked horrible. It was diminish the prestige of the U.S., blah, blah, blah. But it ultimately was put down swiftly and remarkably few deaths. And I think that in a weird way was a kind of stress test of saying, like, actually, Trumpism can't take over anything. I'm going to mute you real quick. You have a weird mic going on. Trumpism can't take over anything. And this concept of the deep state is a real thing. I think the notion of a deep state has been obscured by the fact that it's been used, by all these idiots. Like it's like, oh, the deep state is like Barack Obama's people still who hate Trump, or the deep state is crazy DSA members who work in the Department of Education. No, I mean the deep state is unelected bureaucrats who are appointed generationally, effectively, who maintain the status quo and don't act, even if they might very well be largely Democrat or whatever. Certainly not all of them. They don't ultimately have any loyalty to something outside of itself, and so they enforce the legal mechanism and they manage the country, and that includes its foreign policy and its domestic policy and all that goes with it. There is a deep state. And, it's not a conspiracy or whatever. It is how this government functions. We have the largest deep state ever. And the fact is, like, the conservative movement can shake its fist and rage, but it's ultimately, it's going to have like 2 hours in the sun, and it ultimately can't overthrow this thing. And that's an important thing to remember. In any kind of like, again, Civil War talk or kind of notions that like, we just need some badasses on the right who are going to take no prisoners and take over the government. Well, you'd last 30 minutes. This was the American right firing on all cylinders in a moment of trauma and high emotion, and it didn't. All it did was like look like idiots for 2 hours.
Yeah, the one thing that is my mic still acting up?
A little bit, but
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But the one thing that I think is the big tragedy of conservatism at large, is that, and this of course is particularly true with conservatives like in Middle America, is that they're under the wrongful impression that populism can guide governance and can guide authority, in the sense that, well, let me put it like this. if you look at American history and you look at the American War for Independence, 3 of the 4 wealthiest men in America supported America's war for independence.
Right.
George Washington, John Hancock, and some other guy who was the big financial chief, so to speak. And so you had to have a faction of the elite kind of join you. I mean, Washington was part of the British officer corps and
Yeah.
had some real experience and so on. Yet at the current time, these people are under this impression that that them as commoners can take on the nobility all at once without a faction of the nobility kind of joining them, or in particular guiding them, because they need their energy channeled correctly. They think that they can do it on their own, and they're not going to be able to. And they're kind of learning that the hard way, and maybe they just won't learn it at all.
Yeah. I don't think they will learn it, because that would be to dismiss the kind of mythic structure that it would be like going against their own religion, like most deepest held beliefs about what this country is. I mean, one of the fascinating things about Q was that it depicted that you have patriots on the inside. So there was like an awareness of, behind Q was an awareness of Trump's kind of failures and buffoonery. But then there was also kind of awareness of this reality of the deep state. And so you got this fantasy of like, oh, the NSA, they're the good guys, y'all. And they're patriots on the inside. And there's going to be this day of redemption and a kind of day of the rope when, we're going to just frog march Hillary Clinton and John McCain out onto Pennsylvania Avenue and just shoot them or something. But again, it was this deeply held fantasy that like patriots can win. If we are just good, if we believe in this hard enough and we're good, like it's gonna happen. And I don't think they're gonna give up these fantasies.
I think your point about the day of the rope, hyping that sort of line about revolution, and people kind of think of the French Revolution. I think that that's for these small p populists living in the Midwest, the South, and other places. When you are openly hostile to the nobility in that sort of way, you can actually strengthen them, because what happens is if they feel as if that they are under attack by the peasants or the commoners, they will band together like never before. And so you look at across party lines. I don't want to say party lines, but you look across the political spectrum, from people like David Frum, who has traditionally, just in typical neocon, whatever, to people on the far left who may have opposed, like the Iraq War in the 2000s, who are in the upper echelons. They're kind of now united. They're kind of basically united against this entire populist force, because they now see it as extremely threatening.
Yeah.
And so it's basically like them throwing up the drawbridge before the peasants get to them. And again, it's making the regime more, not necessarily more powerful, but it's making it more stable, because the regime is just much more aware of itself and how it can be threatened.
Yeah. You make some very good points. All right, we'll do Magnus and then Radar.
Hey, Richard.
Hey, Magnus.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Bad. So I came in a little bit late. Apologies if you went into this earlier. But you talked about how J6 was like different, and right-wing activism as a whole was like there wasn't an element on the left that like was exactly or that was really a parallel. Could you expand on that a little? Like how you said the left didn't have people who'd put boots on the ground and do January 6th?
Well, okay, it's not that there isn't left-wing activism. It's that when there's left-wing activism, to a very large degree, it is like throwing a party and a celebration. So it's like like after one of the school shootings, I think in Florida, there was some major gun control activist things that took place in the mall. And these were like supported by major Hollywood figures. They were, had well produced, had stages. All the timing was down. I mean, it clearly was like had major backing and was just kind of like a celebration. And now BLM isn't quite like that. It can be like that. But BLM also has some like authentic, organic components to it where they might just go out and like burn a place down or get violent in some way or engage in some kind of felony, and so on. But those aren't the kind of like middle class to upper middle class white people who are governing, much of liberalism. So there is an authentic component to it, but there's also a kind of synthetic component to it. But I think what's remarkable about the right is that you really will have these kind of like organic creations. I mean, Charlottesville was to a very large extent totally organic. I mean, it was Jason Kessler to a large degree, but it was all of these people organizing something and be willing to come out to it as well. I mean, and I'm not just saying this in some kind of self-serving fashion. I mean, I was kind of an afterthought in the sense of like what was going on in terms of planning and so on. J6, I mean, the Donald Trump said January 6th is the date, I'll see you there. That was enough to inspire all sorts of like parallel organizations to get their asses in gear and get this thing going. And I don't see really anything like that. I mean, you'll have some things where like the West Virginia teachers will do a walkout or whatever, which is, very organic. But I just don't see that level of like parallel structures working in unison and like organic normies engaging in activism like you see on the right. I think it really is a strong difference.
I guess that makes sense. I guess I would add that to the extent that there is organic like protests on the left, it's like BLM, like they're kind of the two. There's like the upper middle class, like Instagram photo, like shitlibs who will come out and protest after something, but like the part of it that is more organic, in the case of the left, is I think is also why it's more violent. Like it is like with the BLM stuff, it's sort of lower class blacks or people like the Rosenbaum guy are like criminally insane. And on the right, the organic part is it's like lower middle class, definitely, but the people who will like do a spontaneous protest that might get out of hand are a little bit more organized, I guess. So the part that's, I guess I'd say, the part that's activated.
Well, no, the leftists who get violent, they have like the moral high ground, is how they see themselves. So that their violence is like just like always justified. It's how they see themselves.
Like in the case of Antifa, yes, but I think there's also a lower class element, like with BLM, who there are people who are, I guess identify as left wing, but are just I don't know, like kind of out of control,
genuinely
dumb people.
There are dumb people, and they're genuinely outraged at like someone in their neighborhood getting shot. They're just like, they are motivated in a very immediate fashion, and they get violent. But there's obviously there's kind of BLM Inc., so to speak, which is not like that. But they're able to kind of connect between those things.
It's like the high-low alliance type thing with the left.
But I also think that January 6th protests, they had a lot of low. I do think they are the white equivalent to BLM when it comes to class. I think that they have it weren't middle class people or upper middle class people who demonstrated. It was mostly what you might call the many words to say what those people are.
Don't interrupt, Guillaume. Okay, just let someone finish.
I was finished.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree. There was a lot. I mean, you'll have photos of people with like Gucci handbags, or this woman who flew in on a private jet and eventually is going to actually serve a prison term. But yeah, there was a lot more lower class elements. I mean, I think Ashley Babbitt was in financial distress. and other people like that. Yes, Guillaume, go ahead.
Well, hold on. I haven't seen like a survey of the J6 rioters, but um, I've heard that they were like kind of like petite bourgeois people.
Yeah.
Like, of course they're like in debt, but that's because like they have like a business, and it's like poor people can't get in as much debt as like, you know, more like bougie people. So, and you said you noticed that, or you pointed out that these guys, they're like red partisans in blue states. So like it kind of I can like picture it like a middle class or upper middle class like local business owner. So I kind of disagree with Bardamu that they're like the white version of like the Dindu nothing crowd. I think it's like a different thing. I think these are like middle class people.
It falls in the middle of the two parts of like the BLM movement, I would say. January 6th does class-wise.
Okay, Radar, do you want to get your 2 cents?
Yeah, thanks. I just have a question. I would like to know if you have any insights into, does any of that polarization carries, and I'm sorry if you already replied to that, but do you think any of that polarization carries into the elites? Like, or in as a segue to that, do you think this internal polarization in the United States affects its capacity to respond to global events, like militarily or otherwise, like it did into after 9/11?
I would say no. Yeah, I mean, because, you know, polarization is so intense that you really do have like two different cultures. And to be a Trump supporter, it's not just that you vote for Trump, it's that you wear different clothes and use different language and have a different type of car. You know, I mean, it really is. But I don't think
does that carry into the elites?
Well, I mean, you'll have the occasional like Elon Musk who's almost like put himself on the side of Trump people or whatever and is their hero. But I find a lot of that to be smoke and mirrors, if not entirely smoke and mirrors. I mean, I think the elites are united. They're not polarized. And that's why I don't think there'll be a civil war. Because the elite, you know, you need George Washington as a, you know, multi-billionaire slave owner in order to like fight against an empire, or you need Robert E. Lee, you know, ditto, a billionaire of his time and his people of his class to fight against the federal government. Like you can't just do it on behalf of like yeoman farmers. And the elite are just pretty unified.
Cool. And do you think this internal polarization affects the U.S.'s ability to like project power abroad? Like, given that, because I can imagine, like, for example, if there's any like military incursion or having to respond militarily to an event, it's like Fox News will say, take the, you know, Tucker Carlson will take the side of whoever is against the against the U.S. and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think that would be interesting if that starts happening, because you see a lot, you know, you see more sympathy for American enemies from Tucker Carlson than you would have seen from literally Tucker Carlson 20 years ago when he was in support of the Iraq War. You know, like the Iraq War was not polarized at all. And in fact, even though there was a lot of anti-war sentiment, true, you did not see that in the media elite. And to be anti-war, to be against the war in Afghanistan or against the Iraq War, I mean, I can remember those days. I was in my early 20s. I mean, you were a bit of a weirdo. And it would be interesting if this starts to spill over into foreign policy. I would say it's not happening yet, but there might be some signs just in the media at the very least that it's so fragmented. And but again, I don't think America is really on war footing to do a big campaign at all. And so you're just going to see like, you know, color revolutions in, you know, Kazakhstan or something. I don't think you're going to really see like we are doing a full-on invasion of a country.
Thanks for the insights.
Sure. All right. We'll do Lightning Patriot and then Knight. You guys get to speak. Lightning Patriot, go.
Hello.
Hey.
So two things. One thing that I think I might have thought about this before when listening to you about J6, but what do you think of the similarities between J6 and you were there at the inauguration riots in 2017? What do you think about that?
Interesting. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the things about the, infamous punch of Richard Spencer was that I was really caught off guard. I didn't fully I kind of looked like an idiot, so to speak. I didn't really recognize how intense things had gotten. I never thought that would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so there I was, just like being like, oh yeah, the alt-rights, it's amazing, alt-line movement, it's so crazy. And then like, boom. So and you could tell that I was really shocked. Like I was totally discombobulated and it was just like, what the hell just happened, And so I didn't fully understand it. I mean, I think there's some interesting comparisons because I even remember walking around. I was obviously there on the 20th, and I remember kind of walking around some of these Antifa goings on, and they at least talked the talk. They definitely didn't walk the walk, the punch of me notwithstanding. But there was a lot of posters about like ending the Christian fascist regime of Pence and Trump. And things, kind of weird things that now seem kind of like curdled milk, like the Christian fascist regime of Pence, or whatever. Then they're going to hang Mike Pence. But yeah, I think there was some. I think there is some similarities just in terms of the intensity. And after Trump's election, there were like huge movements or protests, and that kind of eventuated in
very
some
similar
kind of riot. Yeah,
very similar to Stop the Steal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's some interesting parallels there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, even with J6, I mean, I was like returning from work or whatever. I didn't know about it until I was like out of the shower. I was like, wait, what? It's like I look at my phone. And it's like, what the just happened?
Oh, I was the same way. It's totally.
But another interesting thing that kind of builds upon that is I remember like scrolling around like Twitter search or whatever, search results or whatever. It was just or like trending or something like that. And I remember seeing like a Democrat like political advertisement or like just some like Democrat thing posted on Twitter, and it was like Paul Glosar is like like in communication with the Proud Boys or whatever, and it's also kind of very similar to how, if you remember, during the Trump administration, there was a lot of this kind of stuff like, oh, Antifa is like like in communication with like progressive Democrats. It's kind of funny because that's also a lot of very similar kind of like associating the other side with quote unquote domestic terrorism ops, which organizations which definitely have links with domestic intelligence, but also kind of like a level of grassroots connections, if you can kind of get what I'm saying here.
I think that's true.
It's very similar also with this kind of move towards, if you've seen like this sort of, because it's always kind of existed that, you think politicians, they are assigned to their party, and that's where they kind of lean in their talking points. But you also kind of see this in federal agencies as well. As like recently you've kind of seen some conservatives go out and say, oh, yes, there's some bad people, in the FBI, but there's conservative FBI agents. There's conservatives in your local agency, and it's like they kind of have that as well within these agencies, where there's ones that kind of with their quote unquote politics, they kind of also have their party affiliations, even though they're supposed to be nonpartisan as a public employee. like you have that at some level. I think someone said that about elites. It's like they will kind of, they're elites to their own sort of political. I, I don't know what would the word be, like followers. Like they kind of lean towards their own political ops, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Like like the crazy liberal, government workers, and then you have the government workers who feed like conservative stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some polarization in the deep state.
Mm-hmm.
I would still stress that it still does operate. Like the reason, like how does this country function? It ultimately functions through the deep state, and focusing on like thinking of what is that great book, like The King's Two Bodies? I have not thought about this in a while, but it's like there's the body of the state, and then there's like the actual physical body that could die and could vomit or whatever, but then there's like the body of the state. And I think there's that aspect to the deep state. Like it is a thing. It is a existing managerial order. And then it also does have like real bodies with, opinions and failings and so on.
I was kind of more explaining it as like, they kind of have these political leanings within, like a politician has his position not because he actually holds it, but more as a way to appeal to one side or the other. If you kind of get what I'm saying. Yeah.
Definitely. All right. Let's move on a little bit. I might end this in about 10 minutes or so. Got to go to a birthday party. Conductive material. You were up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You mentioned before that the system was really never under any real threat of Trump, overturning the election, and I agree with that.
Right.
I mean, do you think Trump genuinely thought he could do it? Because I don't see that.
I think he did. Yeah. I don't think it was all just a big like sham. I think he, whether he actually believes that the election was stolen or whether he's kind of a cynical guy where he, will call up a Georgia official and be like, can't you bastards just find 10,000 votes? Like, how hard is that? It might be purely cynical, but I do think that people had his ear who were convincing him of their bullshit. And then I think he did think it might work out.
It's interesting.
And that he could kind of stay in.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how he thought like it could have went, because I mean, I guess they could have showed up and then that was
they could have showed up. I mean, it's a good question. Like, how would this have happened in the best possible world?
Yeah.
So basically, you get people totally fired up. You might not enter Congress because that is like crossing a threshold, literally and figuratively. But you go out with like 100,000 Trump supporters, and you're just like, the election was stolen, stand up for the people or whatever. And you like energize like most of the conservative Senate. And there's just all this passion behind it. And Mike Pence doesn't certify the electors. And then they somehow voted like that. There's all these steps. It's like a 7-step domino plan where each domino has to fall like perfectly for the next one to fall. I mean, it's totally, its chance of success was slim. But yeah, I mean, it did it have a chance? Like, could we be in some weird, kind of like situation where we're just, Trump is like, well, we have to do this. We want to bring back fair elections. We got to get to the bottom of this fraud. And like, we need a long-term investigation, blah, 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 Bill Barr's on it. They could have, I don't know. I mean, be careful what you wish for. He would have become easily the least popular president in like American history.
Yeah.
But he could have like held on to power. I mean, I think it was all just like totally misguided. But was it an attempt to keep him in power for 4 years? Yes. Like, did they think they were going to kind of maybe do it? Yes.
That's interesting. That's all I really had. Thanks.
Sure. All right. I'll do daytime drinker, and then I'll do Dr. Etienne Cohen. Interesting. Daytime drinker, go ahead.
Hey, so I have a bit of an open-ended question here.
Sure.
So I feel like we've kept all our talk about this quote-unquote deep state in the abstract, but there are some interesting facts about the lead up to the insurrection. Like, for example, the leader of the Proud Boys being, arrested the day prior and then being revealed as like an FBI informant.
Yeah.
Similar thing happened in Michigan with the whole governor's kidnapping plot. And
that was clearly well, not clearly. It looks to me like there was a lot of entrapment or enticement going on with that Michigan plot deal. We've seen this stuff before, obviously, but yeah, it did look like you had a bunch of yahoos, and they had FBI agents being like, "So, do you want to kidnap the governor and stop COVID?" Kind of thing.
Exactly.
And yeah, I think that was going on there. I mean, I think the what is his name, Taro or whatever from the Proud Boys. I mean, I think you could kind of explain a lot of his problems away as like he's just some dude who he has a criminal record. What did he do? He burned a black rainbow flag or something. Is that what he did? Or he burned a Black Lives Matter flag, or maybe a rainbow BLM flag. And was arrested. And then the other thing of, when these dudes who are in charge of Proud Boys, like, yeah, they're talking to the FBI and giving out names. That's not really anything new. But yeah, I mean, what are you suggesting something extremely sinister, or are you just saying that like there's a lot of botched people on the right?
Well, I'm not suggesting anything cynical, and I'm actually asking you this knowing that you're probably trying to like desperately move away from this, conspiracy-driven right.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the lead up to the January 6th riot, I mean, I woke up that day knowing that something was going to go down.
Really?
I did.
Well,
I mean,
I am because out of the loop because I didn't.
Well, probably because. Well, I followed some like QAnon type of like websites at that time. I mean, people were talking about moving, people were talking about essentially laying their lives down. But this is all to just preface me saying, I mean, do you think that in your time in the spotlight that there were people in and around your movement that maybe were they were
bad
reporting
intentions?
to some agencies. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
I do think that. And I also think there were a lot of people who had bad intentions, who might not who were not just like FBI agents undercover or anything like that, but just generally had bad intentions. They either they were interested in activism solely because they wanted to get into fights. And I think there were a lot of people who didn't have any real sincere belief at all, but just wanted to create like the next Berkeley battle or whatever. And I think there were just a lot of very bad people. I think it's been very clear, it's been revealed that there are people who are pathological liars who were all over the movement. In terms of the FBI keeping tabs, it wouldn't, I mean, I don't know of anything direct, but it wouldn't surprise me if there weren't someone kind of keeping tabs. I think a lot of that can be done digitally. So you don't necessarily need a agent provocateur or something. But I don't know of any kind of firsthand thing. But I do look back upon that period with just a great deal of cynicism. I feel like I was surrounded by people, so many of whom had really bad intentions. And then a lot of the people who were kind of good were also kind of traumatized by the whole thing and have just kind of left or whatever, formed their own little mini clique and whatever.
Yeah,
so it's.
I actually saw I saw in an old interview with Mylene Yiannopoulos from this summer the other day, and he actually said that he had some FBI agents who knocked on his door and said, "Don't go to January 6th today." And so that tells you how.
I remember that.
Yeah,
that's fascinating. Why would they? If that is true, Keep in mind, Milo.
I'm inclined to believe it's true. And
yeah, but anything he says, you have to take with a heaping of salt. But nevertheless, if that's true, why would they want to protect Milo?
But I think it has. I don't really know why. I do think it might be because he has information about someone, if it's true. But I also think that it has to do with. I mean, you said how many shady people were involved in January 6th, and I think that just proves it. I mean, imagine how many FBI informants and people who wants to turn on people who are involved in that thing. These are not any people who have any loyalty to each other and constantly backstab each other. If it's true what Milo is saying, and it was leaked to the FBI, and so it must be just. Full of people who are just waiting to. These are not any close-knit people who seize powers. These are not any Bolshevik clique in 1917 or something. These are very people, very shady people who don't have any loyalty to each other or any loyalty to any ideas, for that matter.
No.
It's just about selfish. I do think it's about getting rich. I saw this funny picture. It's that. Radar might know what I'm talking about because he's Brazilian. There's this famous picture of, I think it's Brazil, where on one side of the fence there is this huge, there is tennis courts and big wealthy houses, and on the other side of the fence it's slums. And it says, and it was a picture, and it says on the slum section it said white nationalist supporters, and on the right section is the white nationalist grifters, and I do think that's very much a good summary of the people who went to January 6th.
Absolutely, and there's no real institution. There's no real institution in white nationalism. Like there's just basically grifts, and it's very sad. Like there's no way you enter white nationalism and like do research for this or work on this project. It's just this endless cycle of grifting. It's depressing.
Well, yeah, there's no elite defection, there's no like George Washington. But yeah, so like they're led astray by grifters, and I'm not saying that they're good otherwise. Like if they didn't have grifters, like it's good that their leadership is ineffective, because I don't want to be ruled by the QAnon crowd.
Right.
But it's about like their idea of America, like about how there should be patriots on the inside. Like they don't have to set up like a parallel institution. They can't just like openly declare that they're going to have an illegal coup and that it's okay. It's like it's about they have to adhere to some kind of norms, right? Because they're the true Americans, and then the guys on the left are the fake Americans. Then you've got the guys on the left calling the guys on the right.
Thing.
Yeah, it's Caducean.
Yeah, it's a Caducean project. There's no question. You're the real racist. No, you're the real racist. I'm the real patriot. No, you're a fake patriot. No, you're a fake patriot. This Caducean cycle where there's no end to it. It's just this endless churn of declaring that someone else is evil and that you are on the side of the angels. And it disrupts development, and it maintains a kind of hegemony. It's never going to end, and there's no real like meaning to it all. It's all just inherently fake. All right, Dr. Etienne, if that is who you are, Dr. Etienne Cohen, they, I think, opponent of GOP lies, occasional contributor to some institute. I'm very curious what you're going to say. Go for it.
Okay, so this is kind of back about sort of the ideal scenario with what happened last year in January. Do you think it ultimately probably would have worked its way back to the Supreme Court and Trump would have lost in the Supreme Court? If
that might have happened, yeah. If it had gone through, yeah.
I have a follow-up question to that, because I'm assuming that like that's probably what would have happened. Do you think anybody in the Supreme Court would have actually sided with Trump?
No, I mean, it's interesting that the Supreme Court basically said, and I would have to go revisit a lot of the 2000 that whole controversy, but it basically said like just this endless recount is kind of bad for the country, and we're going to move forward with this with George W. Bush as the president. And there was very strong dissents on. I believe RBG dissented, and again, correct me if I'm wrong in the facts here, but that was an interesting case. Now, no one was claiming that the election was stolen exactly in 2000. It was basically like, we don't quite know because it was so razor thin, and there are all these irregularities with like, what is it?
Butterfly ballots.
Yeah, butterfly ballots, or like Palm Beach Floridians, like mostly former New Yorkers voting for Pat Buchanan, like they didn't know what they were doing, and it was a different situation. But yeah, I mean, if the GOP had gone through with this and they had canceled the electors and elected new ones or created new ones, I think they would have lost that vote. But if they had won it, surely there would have been a Supreme Court battle, and the Supreme Court already showed its hand on this.
Right.
It would have just knocked it down.
Right. They told him to fuck himself.
The Supreme Court is the big kahuna. I mean, I did a podcast actually with Mark Brahman on this, and I don't know if other people have talked about this, but it's interesting of like who is really sovereign in the United States. And I would say that the Supreme Court is, because you have these interesting things like the president is elected directly, and he kind of has the big national appeal to the entire nation, but he doesn't legislate; he executes, and he can veto legislation. But then, actually, the House can override a president, or the Congress can override a presidential veto. But then who can override even that? The Supreme Court through judicial review. So they have the ultimate say. And in fact, the Supreme Court will preside over an impeachment of the president. So, it's a very kind of twisted and overlapping system. But I would say that at the end of the day, structurally speaking, the Supreme Court is the sovereign entity. And so the president has a lot of sovereignty in terms of foreign policy. But again, the Supreme Court can, if not impeach him, they can kind of preside over the impeachment. And so even they, at the very, very end of the day, kind of have say on foreign policy. So the Supreme Court is the big kahuna. It is one sovereign actor in the United States. And that's really interesting. Like, I don't think any kind of judicial sovereignty, you don't see that in like Prussia or most European countries or France or so on. It seems to be a kind of unique thing that was laid out in the Constitution, but kind of came to fruition as America was developed.
Yeah, and they have taken, but at the same time, they don't really want to be seen as being political.
No.
The Chief Justice, under the second impeachment, he didn't want to be present during the second impeachment. His reasoning was something like, well, Trump is not president anymore, so I will not have any part of this. But at the same time, they are the most powerful political institution in the country. So it's they have a very bizarre balance that they have. They are the ultimate sovereign, but they don't want to say that. But they want to remain anonymous too. I think Scalia. I think he even said at one point that he didn't want the Supreme Court to be televised because people might didn't want to be recognized on the street, and and he wants to have a private life. And so these people, if there are a deep state, I have to disagree with you on the concept of the deep state. I think that I don't think there's any clear division between what Trump says and what his bureaucrat executes, but I do think that if there would be a deep state, it would be the Supreme Court, and that they are more because they are independent. And actually, most of the canon conspiracy, they are most accurate when you if you talk about the Supreme Court. They are this hidden force who can override the president and Congress, and people don't know who they are. They're very shady, and so it's interesting because I've never heard the canon conspiracy bring up the Supreme Court or talk about that. But
they might rage against them a little bit, but they certainly don't talk about it in these terms, and they don't talk about it in like the idea that a judicial, like judges, basically like a Sanhedrin, that the notion that a bunch of lawyers being supremely sovereign is like a problem. You know, they kind of like that idea of like, we're a nation under laws, you know, whatever. Like,
yeah, exactly. And they,
you know,
and
it's like, this is actually, there's serious problems to that. This notion of like a judicial priestly class having the ultimate say, even if they don't exercise their power very often, they have that huge ultimate say on things. You can't ultimately do what you want in this country. Like, through judicial review, they will slap you down, and they might very well slap down Medicare for all. I mean, they could. I mean, I tend to think that the current court would, and you know, you can't ultimately do things because of that mechanism. So it's very stable, but you could also say like very. It's a very problematic, and I don't think we talk enough about this. Like, I would prefer a kind of sovereign authority and charge that you know what it is, you know. So it's like someone takes responsibility for something. And I think what's kind of remarkable about America is this like endless attempt that no one's in charge, you know. You can't blame the bureaucrats. The politicians, throw the bums out. Okay, we've got some new ones in there. Oh, the Supreme Court, well, they're just interpreting the law. Like, you know, they're not demonstrating power. Or like, you know, foreign policy. Oh, we're just fighting for justice. We don't have any interest involved in attacking this country. It's just this like endless shell game. And I don't know. I mean, call me autistic if you must, but I like things when they're just honest and direct. And just like logical. Like, we invaded Iraq for the oil, and we did it on my authority, and I kind of need to take the blame if it all goes south, you know? And
on top of that,
and I do think it's very. I mean, and if you're gonna have some rule of judges, I do think it would be much better if you have something like Iran, where they have the guardianship of the Islamic jurists, where they are completely honest with the yes, we want Sharia throughout the whole society. It's from top down, and we're gonna apply this to a society, and this is who we are, and this is what we believe in. It is much better than you just have this shady organization who just have veto power over everything, and they also make up powers out of thin air, which is completely bizarre. And no one can question that. Famously, Roe versus Wade is obviously the most famous example of this, where they just invented the right to privacy out of or the gay marriage case, where they say that oh, look, we have read in the 1800s these people. This equal protection clause. This is suddenly about gay marriage, which is completely bizarre. And these people, they just make things up out of thin air. So it's completely insane.
Yeah, it is remarkably stable though, and it has a kind of, you know, a political theology to it. You know, there is a kind of belief system that justifies its sovereignty, and I think that's something to examine. And again, when we're talking about the most powerful government on earth, so we can't really say like, it's the house of lies or whatever. Like, it works in some way, but it's definitely not the kind of order that I would prefer.
It's also gotten more disorganized kind of recently, because I think it was the Obama administration that made it so you only needed 50 or 51 votes to get a judge in. So it's less bipartisan. And the Me Too thing that kind of popped up also made it really arbitrary. Like, Amy Coney Barrett is there because you couldn't take a man because they would have Me Too'd it and stalled it out until Trump was gone.
Right. That's true. They would have, because you can basically Me Too almost every man, unless they're asexual or weirdly gay. You know, again, I'm not a fan of Kavanaugh, but like, the level at which they sunk in order to determine that he was a rapist was just bizarre. You know?
Yeah, people forget this, almost how completely delusional the left was during the first 2 years of Trump with Russiagate and Kavanaugh the rapist, and there were a lot of these things, and that has mostly disappeared now. I think now it's the right who are insane.
Well, that might be true, but also Biden kind of ended it because there's this forgotten scandal. Biden is like Teflon, or he's like slippery. You nothing sticks to him. Like there was another. I mean, again, I'm not. It was a somewhat plausible claim. I mean, no real evidence, but there was a plausible claim of Biden, like not raping someone, but kind of harassing them or being real handsy and gross to some staffer. I think, again, I didn't really buy it, but I don't know. Was there like maybe something there? You know, I mean, yeah, sure, but like you could basically do that to almost anyone, and Biden, you couldn't. He kind of ended it. Biden's a remarkable politician. I think he's underestimated.
Yeah, and he has such a long track record too. He was meeting with the Soviet premier in the 70s, and on official business. So he really has this. He's almost a bit like a monarch, that he has this. He's been in power for so long, and it's actually quite nice, I think.
Yeah. All right. I have to go pretty soon, but I'll.
Can I ask you one quick question? It's a yes or no. Do you think that Al Gore won Florida in 2000?
I would say he probably did.
Yeah, I think that too.
But a bit ambiguous and water under the bridge. Okay, so we'll do Salt, and then I'll do Mast and Thrust. And so I'm kind of on the last legs here, so keep it pretty brief. Mast and Thrust.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I said, how do you think history will view Trump as a great man of history type, decades from now, compared to his contemporaries like Obama and Xi and Putin? Because clearly Trump, whether we agree with what he did or didn't do, has been this polarizing, magnetizing figure. And his impact is felt whether you like him or not. And I just wonder what history will do to him. Will he be kind of like a Nixon figure who some diehards in the right wing look back on fondly, but otherwise history kind of treats poorly? Or will he kind of be elevated to some greater height that recognizes his impact regardless of, just because of who he is?
It's hard to imagine. Stranger things have happened, but it's hard to imagine him being lionized. I mean, the fact that he didn't attend inauguration was significant. Even today, I mean, it was granted while I was driving, I wasn't listening very intently, but Biden did his January 6th speech, and he said, like, this guy, he's not like Reagan or the Bushes or Clinton or Obama. He's something, he was almost kicked out of the club. And even George W. Bush, who is just objectively the worst president in my lifetime, is now treated as like, oh, he was a good guy, Yeah,
and I guess. Sorry to interrupt. My point.
Go ahead. I can't imagine Trump being let back.
My point is that I remember how big of a deal when Obama became president. The Obama love and outpouring, and how just big of like a zeitgeist type moment that was crazy. And I feel like that, like the whole love for Obama has kind of gone away. Like he's not really that
he's
big
kind
of
of forgotten.
Yeah, he's kind of not that big a deal anymore. And I think a lot of that had to do with Trump kind of making this. I think a lot of that had to do with the way the Democrat Party went, but I also think that there's only so much room in the spotlight in the media, and that Trump has just this enormous place in the media's attention that I don't know. Again, just was kind of a thought experiment. How do you think, 100 years from now, what people will think of him? But yeah, that was my thought, that even Obama has kind of already faded.
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, my initial thought is that you're going to have shrill liberal historians who just lambast him and inflate his villainy. But I don't know. I'm wondering if that's too easy of a take, and that maybe there's something else going on. I definitely don't think history is moving in his direction and he's going to be lionized. Also, a curious, like, other question would be, how is the conservative movement going to treat him? You see this less so now, but certainly 10 years ago and most certainly 20 years ago, you know, if you walked into CPAC, it was basically just like Reagan paraphernalia everywhere. You know, big posters, images, every speech evoked him. He was treated as a founding father. I'm curious if the conservative movement is going to do that. It does seem like they're doing that right now, but will they do that 15 years from now? It's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, actually.
Oh, I appreciate your thoughts anyway. I thought it would be a fun little prompt.
Yeah, no, it is a question. I would just suggest, I think he's going to be, his villainy, the fascist quality is going to be, you know, inflated beyond all proportion. But who knows?
Which is kind of epic in its own. I mean, that's kind of
true. Yeah. Joe Biden will be like, you know, good guys like Dick Nixon, you know, the good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interesting what his when he dies, what the newspapers will say about him. That will be very interesting to read.
All right, real quick, D. Lewis. Oh, let me let you in. All right, I've got to go really soon, so keep it brief, but go.
Hey. Oh, gosh, you can hear me. That's great. I just wanted to ask, see if you've seen West Side Story yet.
The new one with Spielberg?
Yes.
I have not seen it yet. I do want to see it, and I was going to go, and I don't think it's been a success, like, at least financially, and it was no longer playing at the theater here. So, but it you know, Spielberg is obviously a masterful filmmaker, even if you want to say we disagree with him, and Mark Brauman and I have a field day analyzing him. He's still a masterful filmmaker. So I'm sure he did a very good job. But
yes, I expect it to be quite good. I have not seen it yet either, but I expect it to be very good. I can't convince my wife. She's not a fan of musicals.
Well, I understand.
But
there's a lot of good music in that.
I'd say I
musical.
like to categorize Sondheim in a separate bin than I do other, I guess, musicals.
Yeah. My favorite musical remains Chess.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Salt, you're up, and then I'm going to head out.
So if Trump is the ghost of Christmas future for the GOP, and he'll always be kind of haunting what's coming down the pipe and kind of the idiocracy of how they evolve, will Ron Paul even get to be the ghost of Christmas past, or will he just be forgotten as kind of like a pseudo Trump?
I think the latter. Yeah. I don't know how the GOP can move beyond this. You know, like there's a lot of push towards DeSantis, and there's this weird push towards like pumping up Florida as like the free state of Florida, and this like you know, all the conservative grifters are moving there, like actually moving there. I just don't see it from DeSantis. There's just a total lack of charisma and creativity, and all the COVID stuff is going to at some point just kind of be in the rearview mirror, and he's just too much of a Republican of yesteryear. I just don't know how the GOP can dump Trump. I don't know how they can get away from him, and no one can quite do what he does.
So if they don't have Trumpism in the future because they don't have the personality, and they definitely can't go back to the free market or libertarian or Rothbardianism or whatever, where do they go besides sliding deeper and deeper into QAnon type stuff?
They don't. Well, I mean, I think going with Trump means that there's going to be a new QAnon type stuff. I think the dilemma is like, do you can just continue this, which generates so much energy against you as well, but energy for you, or do you try to, like, you know, ride the wave of the energy and then go with some off the shelf Republican like DeSantis? I just don't think they can do it. I can be proven wrong. My gut is just telling me Trump is running in 2024. and they will not dump him. They can't. He is who he is. I mean, there's also kind of a good argument to be made that like you can win without him. Like there is a natural, you could say Caducean quality or like just dialectical quality to the elections of like every time one party gets a little strong, they start overreaching or their bad sides are kind of revealed and et cetera. And we just have this there's just this natural kind of 51-49 churn going on. I mean, I think you could make that argument, but I don't know. I think they've sold their soul to Trump. They can't win without Trump, really, and they need that dark energy. Like as I like to say, like COVID denial and vaccine denial and QAnon, these are features, not bugs. To say that like, oh, if only we could get rid of vaccine denial, then we could be like a big party and everyone would love us. Like that's wrong. That's delusional. Because they engage in this silliness is a source of that's a source of strength. Like that adds that it's that dark energy that you have to go to. I mean, the metaphor I like to use is like, to solve this murder, Clarice Starling has to go like visit, Hannibal Lecter. Like you have to kind of like go there in order to actually win. Yeah, it's going to be Trump. I might be proven wrong. I just think they are totally they've sold their soul to Trump. They're all in. He's running in 2024. No one fucking holds a candle to his charisma. Like, just no one. Don't talk to me about DeSantis. Don't talk to me about Nikki Haley. Maybe Tulsi Gabbard kind of pulling I'm a Republican now thing. That would be kind of fascinating. But I don't think that ultimately is enough. I think they've just got to go with Trump. All right, gents. Sorry, Pat, you came in a little bit too late. I am going to get going. I have to go to a birthday party. But good talk. And I think we covered a lot of interesting ground. And 2 hours of good discussion. Thanks for contributing. And I will talk to you all soon. All right. Thanks for being on.
Yes, goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, what's up?
How are you, Bard? How was Spencer's space? I saw it was a bit.
Yeah, I would say it wasn't his best space, but it was. He touched on some interesting subjects, I think, and it was obviously about January 6th because it's the anniversary, and yeah, it was quite interesting that I'm gonna invite some other people who was on that space. Let's see who was in there. I think John was in there. Hi,
William. How are you?
Bard, everyone.
Yes.
Hey. Oh, never mind. Let's just continue. Post Spencer space.
Yeah, we didn't really. I just started it, so we don't really talk about any. We haven't started about it yet. How would you rate it, William, from 1 to 10?
That space, I would rate the space in a 7 out of 10, which is a good rating because there's at least 6 ratings under it. Think about it. So I mean, that's a good rating. So yeah, it was about J6, and today is the anniversary. So he said what he needed to say. Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be like a big space covering a lot of ground. It was on topic, and I think the guests didn't waste anyone's time. There was quality control on the guests. So yeah, that as far as spaces go, that was a good one. In my
Yeah, I think it wasn't his best bit, but it wasn't his worst either. I do think it was okay, and because I have missed the last few spaces, and I do think that from what people have told me, they have said that those were awful, and yet you have a bunch of people who never made any points, and but I do think everyone stuck on topic here.
I noticed there were a lot of people listening to the space that I normally wouldn't expect to be in a Spencerite space. I was in an appointment, so I couldn't be in it, but I saw that like Yev and a couple others I wouldn't expect to be there were there.
Yeah, I saw I think some of them were there because I was there. When one get in, it becomes almost like a trailer that they bring in all of their followers too, and that's where.
Listen, we'll be talking. I hope it's quality entertainment.
Yeah, it is very. These spaces are great. They also like an improvised podcast.
Yeah, no, this is definitely an evolution of podcasts. I don't see the point of having podcasts anymore because like the entire appeal of podcasts was almost like a friend simulator. Like it would simulate having a friend group. Well, you don't need to do that anymore. Now you can directly participate. And there's just endless like kaleidoscope combinations of friend groups you could have. So podcasts, BTFO. We have Twitter Spaces now.
This is true, and the thing about podcasts, which I always thought was annoying, is the format. It was a bit like television, that you have the people who produce it and they just shove it out, and you can never, unless they have a call-in show, and they usually don't do that, and it is just about broadcasting a message. I mean, so I used to listen to TRS a lot, and sometimes when they would say something stupid, I would just think that almost bite my teeth together and do funny faces and be like, "No, you're wrong about this," but I couldn't say it because they can't hear it. And I do think there's a lot of cases with that with podcasts, but that's what's great with spaces, that you can actually participate. I would say that it's the difference between video games and TV shows, that one you're more active involved.
Yeah, well, you can also listen to a podcast where like you can't just listen to a movie, so you can like do other stuff with your hands while listening to it. But you're still right, is that whenever TRS would say something stupid, which is 99% of the time, you couldn't respond. Well, now you can respond. So TRS, you're obsolete. Nobody cares about you. I mean, I stopped listening to them years ago, but there's still no reason to listen to them now that we have Twitter Spaces. Just don't get banned from Twitter. Don't be a dumbass. Don't be a right-wing idiot and get banned. Sorry. Anyway, go on.
Yes, support the vaccines so you don't get banned.
Right on.
Right on. Don't be a rightoid. Don't be a stupid rightoid and get banned. I didn't saw you. Did you hear much of that space, Dylan? I don't think I saw you in there.
I popped in for maybe like 5 minutes before my appointment I had at 4, but otherwise I didn't catch any of it. I mean, it's Richard. He kind of has, for the better part of a year, set out what his stance is on January 6th. So I can't imagine it was radically different, from his position. Like, in any other country, they would have killed them, and it was a great failure for the right, and in a way also a great triumph because it showed the state power is something like that. That's how he's been doing it normally.
I do think that it wasn't really a lot of new. It is true that he reiterated what he has said before, but I don't really remember much new stuff, to be honest. I don't think. Yeah, I mean, it's always great to hear him, but yeah, I do think that January 6th was very much of. He went on a bit about the Supreme Court at the end. I thought that was interesting. That he got very passionate about trashing the Supreme Court, which is which I think is great. That it's always great to see when they get passionate about something, and.
I do think the takeaway, I mean, maybe not from Richard's space, but I think from January 6th, and this is in line with his view, is that I think William has talked at length about how it's kind of absurd that Richard thinks, in any other country they would have been shot. Actually, just before this space went live, I was tweeting about the fact that, in a civilized country, the GOP leadership all would have been shot, and in a less civilized country, they still would have been thrown in jail, the party would have been banned, their media would have been banned. It's really wild to me that this is a thing that we're... A year later, what's happened? A few grandmothers and mentally ill people have had 6 months in jail and that's it. One, what we've done is cruel, and two, what we've done isn't enough. It's really stupid.
Yeah, they punished the wrong people for. They didn't punish the organizers, but they did punish people who just threw a rock at someone. It's very bizarre that they don't punish the organizers. And I do think you're right. It says something about civilization when a great society and a great culture, they actually punish people who misbehave. I mean, it's Africa where people who misbehave don't get punished, and they can however they want to. And it shows what the anarchist state America is in practice, I think, where both the left and the right had their none of the organizers of BLM or January 6 have gotten punished for instigating the riots and
I think
civil unrest.
this is a great example of that old, I think it's Sam Francis, turn of phrase, anarcho-tyranny. We live in a country where there's that famous book, 3 felonies a day. The average American commits 3 crimes a day that can take away their civil rights. Like, not just 3 crimes a day, 3 that could take away all of their rights. This is a country with so many laws on the books that if they want to get you, they will get you. But that's the operative word. If they want to get you. And there's a certain class of people that they do not want to get. Everyone else lives in this weird tyrannical society where if your bike is stolen, there's nothing you can do. If your house is broken into, there's nothing you can do. If you get assaulted, there's nothing you can do. But you run afoul of the right person, well, suddenly you're being audited. Suddenly they're checking your house for unauthorized work done. Or in the case of this, where these people undoubtedly committed crimes. Does anyone seriously think that any of these people should have their voting rights taken away forever, or that they should spend a year in prison for what they did? Like, if you think people shouldn't be able to vote, which I think a lot of us would agree on, then sure. But for this specific act, like only them, not society, only them, it's absurd. That's the American flaw, I think.
Yeah, I get what Sam Francis means with anarcho-tyranny. I don't really like that term for some reason because it's used by people I don't like. But I do think there's something to it that you have this paradox where everyone, where if you put it is weirdly feudalistic. We're in the feudal age. If it was all about personal relationships and being loyal to the duke or something, or the lord, but he could punish you if he didn't like you. And I do think it's the same in liberal democracy, where you don't really have rule of law. It's just about having loyalty to certain institutions, and if they want to get you, they can, because everyone, and they can get you on a technicality because everyone breaks the law. And it is very bizarre also because there is a class of people who are invincible, who can get away with anything, and these are the billionaires, and I think Trump is the most obvious example, and his party January 6. I think any other, it was very treasonous what he did, and I do think that even America, if 50 years ago, would have him in jail, trying to launch a weird coup, and then trying to take away, and he openly defied the government. These are things people get killed for in other countries, and he was just allowed to walk around free.
I think this is maybe a great example of, there's this kind of idea in a lot of maybe, say, the West that tries to make any autocracy seem like, oh, this wonderful place compared, and I think it's really absurd. Like, you'll see those Russia files, the people that think Russia's amazing, but if any Western country was as fucked up as Russia is, they call it degenerate and the worst place on earth. But I do think there's something to be said for the level of rule of law. And I feel that's a very weird point to make, but like rule of law that is present in Russia or China is that if you do something they don't like, they can basically on the drop of a hat make it illegal. But if it isn't illegal, they don't fuck with you. And if it is illegal, well, just play by the rules and you're going to be fine. There's none of this weird little game of a million little paper cuts of bureaucratic laws to try to get anyone that they could want to get. I think that's maybe the great genius of the Western liberal system is they always have a way of getting you because there's just so many laws. If they look, there's something.
And I do think it's very, and the right is very much, I have been trashing Russia for the last few days, and I do think that and I am a bit sick of people who always talk about that for the reason you said. And the right is very much anti-enlightenment, the far right, and the people they complain about it all the time, and oh, they are pseudo Nietzschean that we should listen to strong people and we don't believe in equality. But at the same time, I mean, they are also the biggest white Hindus at the same time, so they talk about no, you can't punish the COVID tyranny, or Kyle Rittenhouse didn't do nothing, or you can't punish people who try to overturn an election and so forth. I mean, I don't think they know what they want themselves. It's a pure reaction, I think.
I mean, I think you have shared that tweet of yours from, I think it was like June, about Nick Fuentes and the no-fly list relating to January 6th.
Yeah.
Like white Hindus. I think maybe a better example of that is just something that's happened just this week. What President Macron has done, where he's, the right-wing fear-mongering is, he's basically said that people that aren't vaccinated aren't citizens. And yeah, good. You don't get civil rights, as you say, Bart, if you're not civil. And in this case, it's not even like you're being repressed. You get to go to a publicly run building, and they'll give you a shot for free, and you get them all back. What's the problem here? If you're not going to play by the rules, you don't get to have what you want. Just stop being a white dindu and get with the plan, or live in alternate society. You can't have both. You can only have one.
Yeah, and it's not a human right to spread a disease. I think it's very interesting because these people before, I always bring this up because I do think it's a good point. I don't have seen anyone else make it. Before COVID, people, the right, they were very much against that gay people should donate blood, and they made the exact same arguments they did we do when we talk about anti-vaxxers, that no, you can't just spread diseases for no reasons, and public health goes before civil rights, and but now they have completely backtracked on that completely, and now it's just that this is the biggest human rights violation in existence, is that you have to wear a mask on a bus, and I will stop at nothing because I will fight tyranny because and it's all performative too. I read a interesting France 24 articles about Macron's statements about unvaccinated. It was a big brain centrist moment, because most people in France are for COVID mandate and COVID passport, vax passport, but both Samor and that left-wing equivalent, I can't pronounce his name, Mélenchon, yes, they both were against it and went out purely against it. So you have these big brain centrists like Macron who are and the people of France, they know they are showing the way, and you have these extremists on both sides who are just reacting and be like, no, you can't tell me what to do, I will. And I do think that was quite interesting. I gotta share that article. It was quite good.
But I do think you make a good point about kind of the stupid liberalism that these so-called dissident right figures have kind of fallen into with all this. I mean, I think it was Michel Foucault who had that work on Biopolitics, the idea that fascism is sprung out of this, this pathological desire to avoid disease. And it's a very similar thing. You see like Jordan Peterson making that claim. Hitler wasn't anti-Semite. Hitler wasn't a nationalist. Hitler was afraid of germs. He was a germaphobe, and that was what it was about. And I think you're kind of seeing these people that were very much, they called themselves fascists. They called themselves dissident right. They called themselves whatever they wanted. No, they were just racist libertarians. That's what they were. They didn't like brown people. They don't like women. They're reactionaries. That's what it is. At the end of the day, when it finally came time for state power to be used for the common good, what happened? They threw a fit. They were going, but this is my rights. This is fascism. 1984, Hitler. Fucking, there's no room for it. Your example of the homosexuals and donating blood, Michel Foucault, the reason he wrote Biopolitics isn't because he had some great principled opposition, to using disease as justification for state power. The reason he wrote it is because he was a homosexual that was HIV positive, and he understood that a society that took care of public health would not give him as much liberty as it gave a healthy person.
Yeah, you see this on the left too, where you have radical liberals who like to post the poster, who like to post the Soviet flag and the images from the Soviet Union, and you have this on the right too, where they say, "Oh, I like pictures of SS soldiers marching, therefore I'm a Nazi," or something. But they don't understand anything about the ideology, and it's just performative. I do think that sometimes I wonder if and this is a real question for me. If Hitler was born in, let's say, 1992, if he would have been a libertarian Ron Paul supporter or a Trump supporter, or if he would have had some other beliefs, because I agree with what you said about how people in the 30s or 40s, Mussolini would have been a COVID fascist, but at the same time you can always find this almost conservative and libertarian streak about in the far right, even when you look back to 30s or 40s, I think, and talking about freedoms and these other people they're going to oppress. It was not as bad as it is now, because of the Americanization, and now everyone in Europe and in the world want to adopt the American libertarian ideology. And when they talk about freedoms, it's very interesting when you look at it in Europe, at least, because the European Convention on Human Rights, it talks about positive rights, and most European countries in the national code and in national legislation also talks about positive rights. But as soon as people talk about freedom, they always talk about it in American context, that you can't take this away from me, and it's a human rights violation if you force me to do stuff that makes me participate in society. Rousseau had this great quote about how people who are individualists, they are not independent. They are the opposite of independent, because they cut themselves away from the societal body, which makes them independent. It's only by being a part of a community that you have power. And
that's very similar to like the contrarians that are such contrarians that by the point they're just the opposite of whatever is the norm. They're not contrarian in any sense. I think there's something to be said to the point about Rousseau. It's the difference between French liberalism and English liberalism. The areas that were influenced by French liberalism historically. Hell, even the United States before, maybe the early 20th century, but, Sweden, the Netherlands, Turkey, Eastern Europe, these were much, much better places before the Anglo virus got into them. The Anglo conception of liberalism, I think it's best encapsulated by religion. Anglo-liberalism will invite jihadis to live in the neighborhood and let them, fester and then blow up a building. French liberalism, it might welcome in a lot more, Muslims, but fuck it, they're not going to at least try to beat them into submission first. Like, it's a very different conception. It's freedom from religion versus freedom of religion. You do not have the right to oppress your child because you are a Muslim. Whereas in the Anglo conception, well, of course it's your right to oppress your child. They're your property, like everything. Everything's a capitalist structure, and you have a right to have it.
Yeah, and I do think that boils down to some sort of Calvinism, because I do think that is the X factor when it comes to these things, because there are other Germanic countries, and there are other, and they are not nearly as insane with this ideology. So I do think it has something to do with some Calvinist ideology about extreme individualism, which these things comes from. I think. I mean, many people talk about like to trash Protestantism, but Germany is not, when the other Protestant countries are not nearly as insane. They didn't have this ideology. It was actually the opposite, where Lutheranism and the state has always been very, very quite interconnected and very tight together.
One can look at like Kierkegaard as a good example of that. He's kind of like this founding father, maybe not intentionally, but a founding father of some of the most individualist strands of modern European thought. But if you look at like what he thought in its actuality, like as it relates to like the state, as it relates to gender roles, as it even relates to race, in the rare cases where he talks about that, this is a very reactionary man. And why is that? Because whilst he was rebelling against the Lutheran Church of Denmark, he was still a Danish Christian in the century they re-legalized serfdom or recreated serfdom. This is a very different cultural context than the type of, like the Anglican perversion of both Catholicism and Protestantism one sees in the British context.
Yeah, and they always have this. Yeah, it's very weird that they have this. The children are the property, and everyone else is. It's only about. It is very shallow. It doesn't really take things into account when you hear about.
What were you saying, Bard?
Yeah. Anyways, that the difference between Anglo-Saxon liberalism and French liberalism, I do think that. I do think it's a product about justifying capitalism, and the ideology was formed after that about freedom and cliches about that. They don't really have any. It is very much an ad hoc ideology, I think, about justifying it. It doesn't take anything up. It doesn't go any deeper than that.
I mean, I think the example of owning children is a really great example of that. Like with the COVID stuff, you'll see people like these school board meetings. Who owns the children? Who do they belong to? Those are the phrases. Do they belong to the parents or do they belong to the teachers? The idea of children as these I'm going to use some very liberal language here, so since I may be a bit cringe in this context, but the idea of children as these sovereign entities who are simply not developed enough to have all the faculties to have all their rights yet isn't in the context. It is they are property until a certain age, not they are unready for the full freedom of adulthood. No, they are property, and then they become people. And that's a very strange thing to think about. In the French conception, the positive liberties, the European idea is very much, I think, they are sovereign. They just can't be trusted with that level of freedom. So we must protect them. We must, as a society, protect each other. The Anglo conception is property. We have no room for the idea of you are a sovereign individual, but you're not ready for all those rights yet. Hence why there are really two mindsets. Basically, this almost very paternalistic, very fascistic family structure that leads to a lot of this rejection of the family and a lot of this abuse that you see, like inversely, both the complete rejection of family and the complete abuse of families. Because the only alternative to that is like the anarcho-capitalist nonsense that leads to like defending child porn. Well, obviously, if they're sovereign, they have all the rights as an adult. It's absurd. It's as you say, the capitalist backwards justification of liberalism. Whereas liberalism, in the French sense, can be used to justify capitalism, but wasn't designed to do so.
Yeah, they had an intellectual life of its own, and going back to Rousseau, his famous quote about "you have to be forced to be free," and I do think that this people like him obviously had a more deeper understanding of it. I do think that the contrast between this form of liberalism is very interesting. Yeah, I forgot my point. I should have written it down. Yes, Jacob, what did you think about the Spencer space?
Well, I was only in it for about 20 minutes or so I didn't really catch too much of the thing. But I was quite surprised by the fact that he actually invited me to be a speaker, or at least accepted my invitation. That was I'm a bit sad that I didn't get the opportunity to ask him some questions. But yeah.
Yeah, you got to put your hand up, I think.
Sure.
Yes, and I do think it has very. I'm running out of things to talk about. I wish there were more people in here. I usually get more people.
How did you get to? Did he know you already? Or why did he pick you as accept your invitation to speak?
Yeah, I've talked to him a lot actually. Usually when he has these spaces, I usually join, and so I actually have talked to him quite a bit.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's quite nice actually.
Yeah, I will definitely join one of those again. Be interesting to talk to him. What did you talk to him about just the whole QAnon situation with infiltrating the conservative movement and like the prospect of a Republican future?
Yeah, it was about January 6th, so it was about many things.
Sure.
So relating to that.
Yeah.
But Dylan, the point about I do think that the vaccination thing is very much of a very good litmus test about how these people, the American influence, everyone on the right have about because most of these countries, they don't really have historically have not had this interpretation that all freedoms are. It's freedom from stuff rather than freedom to do stuff. It's freedom. And you can see this. I remember TRS years ago. They read something from an American founder, I think. Not founder. It was a businessman who, and I think this is a great example of how liberalism is just about justifying capitalism. They read some letter from an industrialist in, I think it was just after America got independence, and he talked about how oh, it is in our country's and the context was that he was this industrialist. He was mad that he had competition from people, from artisans, and he talked about how, oh, it is in our liberty to have freedom of commerce, so therefore you should buy my product or something like that. And so I do think that, and he was making all this liberal language about how about freedom and the freedom to consume. So I do, yeah, it's very much interconnected with capitalism in a way you don't really see in continental Europe. And
I mean, I think you can also, sorry.
No, I was finished.
I was just saying, I think you can also see the kind of parasitic influence of the American idea of freedom on Europe. And like, let's use a good example. This is the perfect example, I think. Thierry Baudet and the Forum for Democracy in the Netherlands. They were on set to be the most successful I don't want to say non-liberal, but let's say not centrist neoliberal party in Western Europe. No socialist party and certainly no nationalist party could come anywhere close to that level. And what happens? He throws a temper tantrum at a party dinner over George Soros trying to enslave the world with COVID vaccines and lockdowns. And where are they now? They have 3 members of parliament and 1 MEP, and it was by far the most successful party that was even remotely out of this neoliberal post-war consensus. And he just threw a Molotov cocktail. He didn't help himself by saying something like, why do you care so much about the Jews? Everyone I know is anti-Semitic. But like, the main spurring on of that argument of his was fucking Soros and COVID. And it's utterly stupid. You cannot have this American conception and have it work in Europe. Even though it's like taking over the minds, especially of the right and of certain like more conspiratorial leftists. Like you'll see this with like what the fuck is it called? Like the Bloc Esquerda in Portugal, or La France Insoumise in France with Mélenchon, and even a similar thing you can kind of see in Die Linke. I don't know about the Nordic socialists, but like they seem to be less Americanized in some ways and more Americanized in others. They have this kind of Americanization. They're conspiracy theorists like our American left. Our left was taken so unseriously for so long because it was full of anti-vaxxers and anti-nuclear freaks, and like it couldn't be taken seriously because the main proponents were all mentally ill. And I don't see how this helps like the people that try to oppose liberalism in Europe to be like, oh, we can't do vaccines. They're trying to poison us. It's absurd.
Okay, well, the people in Europe who oppose liberalism, what they need to do is they need to demand the expulsion of U.S. troops from Italy and Germany. They need to do that. It's underrated, but they've been sleeping on it, but they need to do it. They need to kick the troops out of Europe. If you want to if you're serious about dismantling liberalism, you need to be like, U.S. troops, get the hell out. I don't know. That's my input, but whatever. Sorry, I'm a Yankoid, so just take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, you don't see any parties do that much.
Yeah, if you're a European listening, take the train down to Bavaria or Verona, Italy, or Bavaria, Germany, and be like, hey, Yankees, go home. That's what you got to do.
Yeah. I mean, both left and the right, it's not really on the political. I do think it has to do with Americanization and American pop culture that this. I mean, it's not even theory are these people anti-American. They love to have these American troops, but all of them are pro-NATO. I mean, especially, and these people, they claim to be pro-European Union, but at the same time, the whole point of the European Union was to create an alternative power bloc, which put European interests first. But and all of them are members of NATO, so it's completely counterintuitive why you would have the European Union, who even has armed forces now. People always talk about that as if it were hypothetical, but it does actually have a detachment who the European Union itself, which they can use in certain conflict. It would be as if everyone in the European Union was a member of the Warsaw Pact or something. Or, I mean, it makes zero sense that that people can be both EU federalist and pro NATO.
I do think maybe one of the problems that you'll see with, like, I don't want to say lack of anti-Americanism on both the left and certain elements of the nationalist right in Europe, but it's all toothless. Like on the left, they want to be pacifists and they want to be anti-Americanists. You can't do that. Like if you really believe, as most like these socialist parties do, I think they're my main level of critique, because at least the nationalists, like, they support governments and like military, I should say, like in that regard, they support the military. But the socialists in Europe, they're all pacifists, and yet they have the nerve to be like anti-American. I'm sorry, you can't have both. You can have a military of your own, or you can continue being an American puppet, but you can't exclude American influence and also be protected solely by the United States military. I think that's the problem. There's a lot of utopians in Europe, especially on the left, but I think the right has their own utopian problem. Like this sort of British, as we saw with Brexit, just recently they're starting to realize that Brexit means Brexit and Brexit means Indians rather than Romanians, and suddenly they're mad.
Yeah, the Brexit thing was very bizarre because people like Farage, they ran on it as if as an anti-immigration thing, even though the European Union has nothing to do with immigration.
It wasn't actually quite anti-immigration. He ran in Punjabi neighborhoods on it, increasing Punjabi and Bengali immigration. It was whatever he wanted it to be to whatever the audience was. That's what Brexit was. It was complete and utter nihilism for the help of a few bankers.
Yeah, and he did this really racist dog whistle things where he talked about where he trashed Romanians, talked about Romanians as if when he really talked about when he really meant gypsies, and it's so low hanging fruit to attack other Europeans like that, and they talk about I mean, people like Nigel Farage, they are really race traitor. They talk about wanting to import Punjabis at the same time as they trash Romanians, who are just like any other Europeans, and try to diffuse the line between Gypsy and Romanian.
Based, yeah. Conservatives are race traitors. That's a good one. Yeah, no, I agree. We need to point that out, especially Westernoid European, like West Europeanoids, like they're the worst. It always makes me cringe. How like they achieved Brexit and then suddenly they scatter to the four winds. You never hear them again.
Yes, Laser, you have your hand up.
Yes. First, thank you for just listening. Has been an immensely rewarding experience. I missed the Spencer space, but I inferred that it was about QAnon. January 6th.
January 6th was the topic.
Yeah, I just the mention of the sort of Americanization, globalization of American anti-vax sentiment. I guess I wasn't aware. Was sort of anti-vax sentiment kind of just not really a thing the rest of the world? I honestly don't have much knowledge on that topic.
Yes, I do think that outside of some hippies, it didn't really exist, and even that thing, didn't really. I think that hippies opposing vaccine, they were also Americanized, but I mean, before COVID, no, it wasn't any political to be. To take a vaccine. It is something that is completely new, and it does come from the American right. The whole thing. The only party I know who was anti-vax in it was a super small party, which was a splinter group from the Green Party in Sweden, and that's the only. So it was extremely marginal until recently. But now it's completely mainstream, which is very bizarre. It is almost like politicizing washing your hands or something like that. It's why would you do that? I mean, it is just about being spiteful and just and I do think much of the anti-COVID stuff. I do think that they have that because they don't have any own politics, so they have to rely on the right doesn't have any own politics, so they have to rely on Trump and these stupid anti-lockdown things to mobilize people because their ideology is so unpopular, I think.
Yes, my sort of sense, and what I've cobbled together is, I mean, certainly prior to COVID, I mean, in the United States, you could find people who were anti-vax on both the left and the right. I've encountered a couple of people on the right who had some degree of anti-vax sentiment, but uh, most of the people I'd encountered of that of an anti-vax background were on the left. Liberal women who like to shop at organic grocery stores, and so they just naturally gravitate towards silly science interpretations. And I don't know, like, I just have this. My perception was that initially during the COVID outbreak, it felt like it was really more the left. I mean, we're talking like when before COVID was even sort of becoming a household word, that the left was having the irrational response. I mean, you have Nancy Pelosi saying that thing about don't be afraid to hug an Asian person to show them that we're not racist or anything. The right wing people I knew initially were not expressing, like they were having what you would assume would be their natural reaction, which is to be wary of this outside uh, uh, disease, perhaps again, this the hollowness of in American conservatism, where it's all based now on just like a politicization of this issue. COVID existing was inconvenient for the Trump campaign. You had so many people on the right who just had to believe that it just wasn't even real, and I don't even know where. I mean, it feels like there was an inversion, but I can't really point to where exactly the inversion happened. But that's just my input.
I think it started to switch sometimes after March. I think maybe after April. That because, as you said, in the beginning, it was the liberals who talked about hug a COVID person who is Asian or something, and they did this Asian this hoax about they talked about Asians hate crime and now Asians can't go outside because of racism from the Ku Klux Klan who believe they are all sick and which is completely bizarre when you think back to it now, but um, I do think that Trump has the ultimate. It's his fault that the right in the entire Western world has become anti-vax because it was bad for his re-election campaign. So he started pushing that. No, you don't have to stay at home. You don't have to keep working because the virus doesn't exist or the virus doesn't harm you. So keep working and keep those stock prices up high. It's the Chinese who hate America, who wants you to be at home, and I do think that was very cynical on his part, and and as I said, everything that happens in America is echoed all over the world. So I don't think that the right in Europe or Australia and other places would be so irrational about COVID if it wasn't for Trump. If it had happened during Obama's 10 years, I don't think that it would have happened, or under Bush, that it wouldn't be this hysterical. People would be more reasonable.
Well, I mean, you can't. I'm sure the images are stored online. You can't really look up Trump so tweets now, of course, but um, I do recall back during 2012 that there was some concern because they had that resurgence of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, and there was a lot of anxiety about it making its way to the United States. And if you looked at Trump's tweets back then, they were all about like Obama, he's failing to secure everything down. We need to stop these people who might be infected from traveling, etc., etc.
Yeah, and he has also switched on vaccines. He used to think that people used to say there was this rule with Trump that every time he made a public statement, you could find a tweet from 5 or 10 years ago where he says the opposite, and he did that with vaccines too. Now he's pro-vaccination, but he used to talk about how vaccine causes autism, and he was completely on board with that, and talked about it several times. Are you there, Laser?
Oh yeah, sorry. I didn't have any anything to add, meaningful to add. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right on all counts. Yeah, and it's interesting seeing him now sort of make a slight push on getting vaccinated, and I don't think that's out of sincere concern for the lives of his supporters. Maybe to some degree, in that like he needs as many of them around a few years from now when he runs for president again. But I think it's more just he does probably have a sense, and I can't claim credit for. There's someone I was following on Twitter who kind of pointed this out, that maybe he has the right sense that there's a space politically for like being pro-vaccination but also anti-lockdown, and sort of by making a push for vaccines now, he can kind of appear moderate in a few years on this question, compared to so many other people in the conservative Republican sphere are just now just completely kowtowing for anti-vax sentiment. 2 or 3 years from now, Trump can seem moderate on this issue because he can point back to like, oh, I was saying I was for the vaccine, but I'm just against mandates.
Yeah, I think that I wonder. This is my theory about Trump and future of the Republican Party. I think that Trump will fade away. He will fade away, but there will still be a strong Trumpism ideology in 2016 or 2018 ideology in the Republican Party, but he will not be present. You will still have this everything you associate with Trump, with the Trump movement, but without him and without the personality cult around him. I think it will be the same. It will be interesting to see. That is my pet theory about. I think I'm gonna end this space now. By the way, does anyone have any last things to say?
Not really here. I think we've all hit on the main points, I think, as it relates to January 6th and also COVID.
Yeah. Yes, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm just gonna ask you. Did you see that Alternative for Sverige has they have adapted this anti-vaccine stuff?
What did you say?
I'm sorry. Okay. Did you see that the Alternative for Sweden or Alternativet för Sverige, they have adopted this policy of anti-vaccination stuff recently?
Yeah, it's really obnoxious.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
What do you think? What is it? American influence? Why? I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. It's American influence.
Yeah.
Because they talk exactly the same way that American rightoids think. I've never been a big fan for Alternative for Sweden. They are very Trumpist. I think this is the right word. And they feel very silly, and they don't think. And I do think that it has to do with American influence. Because I see these people who are associated with Alternative for Sweden, and they have the exact same talking points about as the right in America.
Yeah, it's my experience as well. They also seem to have some connections with the America First movement of Nick Francis and stuff.
Yeah, they are the equivalent, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like more of a it's definitely more far right than say Alternative für Deutschland, but it's not as far right as like Nationaldemokraterne or Svenskarnas Parti or something like that.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a third way, so like moderated form of fusion of both.
Oh, do you know the history of the alternative in Sweden, by the way?
No, not. Yes, weren't they the ones that were kicked out of Sverigedemokraterna?
Yes, exactly. They were the youth league and they were kicked out, and they formed their own party. And
but haven't they like explicitly like talked about ethnicity and race and stuff though, which is like
they haven't talked about. I guess they have a little bit, but it's not really.
Okay.
It is just empty cliches about this is the Sweden has always been the country for Swedes, and this is our country, and I actually don't really think that's true, because Sweden has always had historically had a large Finnish minorities, and
sure.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't really, and I do think they very much take. I do think so much of the far right is just about feeling good, and it's not really about being right or and enriching themselves. I think they don't really have. It is very much cliches, and I don't really find them interesting. I don't really know what is about it. I do think that they feel very normy. I think. For some reason, it is very much like. I mean, if you're going to vote for a party like that, at least vote for Sweden Democrats, because they have mostly the same beliefs, but they actually get influence, can actually change things.
That's true.
I don't. It is very popular for some reason that people form these small parties which never would get any influence whatsoever, rather than just collaborate them.
Yes, and like regarding this thing, I mean, I have a friend who now lives in Latvia, and he used to be part of the Danish equivalent of Svenskarnas Parti, basically. And he just texted me the other day, like, "How are things doing in Denmark? Are they required to have the mark of the beast in order to go to the supermarket?" And I was like, dude, why do you text me this expecting that I would have the same sort of opinion? It's just so juvenile and frankly quite retarded. And one often finds himself in this position where one has to like say, well, I'm not at all anti, vaccines, or like have some crazy conspiracy theories about COVID. And I find it interesting that you would assume that just because we used to be on the same, wavelength with regard to immigration policy or like general right-wing political theory. But yeah, it's almost assumed by our, fellow political allies that we would just have this, as you said, quite Americanized, libertarian view of hyper-libertarian view of freedoms and the state's role.
Yeah, and one of the guys who Svenskarnas Parti doesn't exist anymore, actually, but
right.
But the guys who ran that party, they have all become completely anti-vax, and that's the I follow one of them here, and he just tweets about anti-vax all the time, and so they are for some reason these people they.
I don't know if it's like a psychological thing, like people who are prone to take perhaps dissident views are also like very likely to affiliate with other like kooky opinions, because we all know that many things within right-wing political theory tends to attract people who are sort of wanting to be like take the edgy positions and like be contrarians, and perhaps that could have something to like that could be some sort of explanation as well. I don't know, but I find it interesting that like people on the fringe right are so quick to jump to these almost quasi QAnon explanations. Thanks.
Yeah, and I was talking about that earlier. It is it is interesting to see how much of this is how much of a history is that these people are just contrarians. Is this a new thing, or has this always been there? And on the fringe right. I mean, did they ever have their own ideology, or was they always like that? Where does
right.
Yeah. It is funny to think that if Hitler was born in 1992, he would have been an anti-vaxxer or something.
Right.
Yes. Because this autumn I got I bought an old newspaper from an antique newspaper from, I think it was published in 1934 from some Swedish Nazi organization which was publishing it because I wanted to see what people said about the quote unquote movement with the MOOBMENT and what their rhetoric was in the 30s, and I was surprised by how familiar everything was. They talked about the Kalergi plans, and they talked about how the church are secretly Marxist, and they talked about they also had some libertarian aspects about freedoms, and talked about that, and obviously you had the fear of hysteria about communism, and I do think that that aspect has always been there, but I wonder to what degree, because it has obviously evolved.
Yeah, definitely. One of the politicians from New Borgerlige in Denmark got kicked out of the party because he shared some anti-vax stuff on Facebook, which was quite good, at least. So that's some consolence for us, because the AfD in Germany, they seem to have totally gone anti-vax, unfortunately, which is so damaging to their otherwise reasonable positions in many areas. It sort of really damages the reputations of the movement. I think that's my main fear, that all of our previous held beliefs will be forever tainted by these kook anti-vaxxers. That's a great concern of mine, to be honest.
Yeah, and it is a shame with AfD, because they were one of the few parts like that who had they used to have quite educated people who were in it, and I don't know what happened to them, that they have become, that they would subscribe to these things. Because it's rare that you have a party like AfD who has academics and lawyers and people like that in it.
Yeah, and they also had some, generally speaking, at least some fractions within the party were quite reactionary and open to traditional conservative patriotism.
Yeah, I don't really know what is with Alternative for Sweden, but I don't. For some reason, I don't really like them. I do think they were clownish and silly.
I think they were actually quite cool in the beginning, but now that they have gone anti-vax, I think that's a bit suspicious. But I haven't really followed them that much. I just thought it was much better optics than much of the previous many of the previous Swedish political parties that failed, Nationaldemokraterna and Svenskarnas parti. So.
Yeah, but I'm ending this now, I think. And yeah,